Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the December 18th Planning Board meeting. Charlene, if you want to take a roll call, please.
What time is it? I can't see.
Time is 6:33.
Thank you. Richard Anthony.
Here.
Karen Robinson. Here. Lauren Millette. Here. Tim Moore.
Here.
Tom Alberti.
Here.
Dan Kane.
Here.
Nolan Pelletier.
Present.
And Bill Coy.
Here.
Excellent.
Full house.
All right. If you haven't reviewed the minutes, take a quick look, and then I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Motion.
What's that?
Motion.
Are you proposing to accept the minutes?
Yes, I'm proposing to accept the minutes.
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
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 Abstain?
I'm abstaining.
All right, one abstention. And all right. For purposes of PB 24-16, we'll just go into the public hearings. PB 24-16, the completeness of an application from Albert Couillard for a subdivision application. The application proposes a two-lot subdivision of the parcel at 93 Forest Street, tax map 66, lot 017-002 in the LDR zoning district. Parcel A is proposed to have plus or minus 2.6566 acres with 224.73 feet of frontage at Autumn Circle. The remaining parcel B, is proposed to have plus or minus 75.0656 acres with a plus or minus 388-foot frontage at Forest Street. The property owner of record is Luke's Way LLC. This application has been voluntarily withdrawn by the applicant. So that basically means that the applicant has withdrawn it, and if they're going to resubmit it, it'll be noticed as a new application. All right, so with that said, let's move right into the public hearings. All right. Now, I have to read this all in its entirety. Is that the case?
Yep.
Okay. All right, zoning amendments, public hearing. What?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Article 1, purpose, title, authority, and effective dates. 220-1, purpose. In accordance with and subject to chapters 674, 675, 676, and 677 of the New Hampshire Revised Statutes annotated 1987 as amended, and for the purpose of promoting the health, safety, morals, prosperity, convenience, and general welfare, as well as for the promotion of the efficiency and economy in the process of development of the town of Plastow, New Hampshire, and to secure safety for fire, panic, and other dangers, provide adequate areas between buildings and various rights of way, preserve the rural charm now attached to the town, and promote good civic design and arrangement, the wise, efficient expenditure of public funds, and the adequate provision of public utilities and other public requirements. And by other means, now, therefore, the following chapter is hereby enacted by the voters of the town of Plastow, New Hampshire, in official meeting convened. All right. 220-1.1, titled Town of Plastow, New Hampshire, referred herein as either the town of Plastow or the town. Zoning ordinance referred herein as the ordinance. Authority 220-1.2, authority. The ordinance has been adopted by the town meeting vote of the town of Plastow, New Hampshire. A, authorization. The planning board is hereby authorized to correctly restate statutory citations throughout the remainder of the ordinance so as to achieve consistency with the purpose and authority, provided that such changes result in no contradictions within the ordinance or with state law, and further provided that no substantive changes shall occur as a result of any such restatement of statutory citations. The planning board also has the authority to assign and modify the numbering of sections to the ordinance, provided that no substantive change to the ordinance shall occur as a result of the changes. B, amendments. The ordinance may only be amended by a majority vote of the local legislative body in accordance with provisions of New Hampshire revised statutes annotated as amended from time to time. 220-1.3, severability. If any section, clause, provision, portion, or phrase, do I need to read the striked out versions or just indicate that it's struck out?
Just indicate it.
All right. If any section, clause, provision, portion, or phrase following is struck out, the invalidity of any provision of the ordinance shall, okay, continuing, held to be invalid or unconstitutional by any court of competent jurisdiction, such holding shall not affect, impair, or invalidate any other section, clause, provision, portion, or phrase of the ordinance, the following is struck out, the validity of any such provision. All right. Does this continue?
Now you gotta do each one at a time.
What's that?
We're gonna do each one at a time, right? So vote on this one.
Well, I just want to make sure is that the full amount?
Effective date.
Effective dates are still part of.
Okay, that's my only question. So 220-1.4, effective dates.
I don't think you need to read all
I
of
don't
it.
think you.
All right.
No, just say you're changing articles, could be a capital A.
All right.
After
Within this ordinance, an A is capitalized for article. The addition of parentheses herein, article is included.
Good enough.
Okay. All right, so. So at this point, is this a public hearing where we invite, is there anyone from the audience that would like to comment on this particular zoning amendment, Z 2501, that I just read? All right. If you're going to come up, please indicate your name, where you live.
Ryan LeBrecq, 174 Main Street.
Right. And I would ask that if you're going to make any type of comments, I would exhort you to at least keep them closely tied to this particular zoning article that we were
Speak into the microphone, please.
talking about. Okay?
Can you explain what all that gobbledygook meant? What's changing?
Would it make sense to read the portion that we have?
The portion that we're gonna do,
Not for public-
right.
Necessarily for public comment, which is the voter's guide that will accompany.
Sure.
Okay, what was that then? What was you
Voter's
saying?
Maybe we
guide?
can just read the voter's guide portion after we read all the public comment of the actual language. So
All
that
right.
it
Well,
kind of
when you say read the voter's guide, the actual language that we have here that I'm reading from is what.
This little section.
There's a section right below, says the voter's guide,
Oh, the
Plastow
I wanna
zoning
answer
amendment.
this question. That's kind of what I'm saying.
All right, okay, well, okay, fair enough. So, okay, the Plasto zoning amendment Z 25-1, voter's guide. All right, so this initiative has been proposed by the planning board to allow it to correct statutory citations and to renumber the ordinance without having to constantly amend the ordinance through town meetings. Does not authorize the planning board to change the intent of the ordinance or any provision thereof. Does that speak to your questions? Is there any other comment from the public on this particular zoning amendment?
Yeah, that's grammatical changes,
Yes.
those types of things, numbering.
It's really trying to box in that it's mostly related to numbering and statutory citations, so we don't have to.
Right, so in some sense, it's sort of like Scribner type stuff or de minimis type
Yes.
changes, and there's nothing of substance that's being changed. It's just to be able to affect some sort of editing to bring stuff.
Up to date, clean it up. Right.
This information is in with the meeting data, right? So they should be able, if you want to follow along, you should probably be able to look it up online and read with us if you want to read it with us.
That's the agenda?
It should be posted out there, I would think, in terms of, since it's a public
On
hearing.
the website.
Yeah.
Website or in the email?
Probably the website if it's for a public
If you
hearing.
look up tonight's,
Actually,
it
it's
should be in
probably
tonight's
both.
meeting.
Just
Yeah.
That happens every time.
ignore that.
Wakes me up every time. Should have waited about an hour.
You just gotta be careful when she picks it up. I mean, she's gonna swing.
Right.
All right, there's nothing.
So again, for purposes of this particular warrant, if there are any questions from the public, we can have, if there's any discussion, because at this point, then we would close the public hearing. if
On
there's-
that one.
There's nothing.
Not closed.
Draft motion to approve.
Do we get- yeah.
It's under the planning board and it says meeting materials, December. Oh, okay.
All right, so I'll move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z-25-01 to the warrant as being recommended by the planning board.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor,
The discussion,
discussion?
thinking ahead, if we just approve this for the warrant, all of this text goes on the ballot
Okay.
for all of these, which means we're gonna have about 55 or 60 ballot sheets that are just text. And
It's gonna be very expensive.
so what we typically do in the language that appears on the ballot, so we'd say, for Z-25-1, zoning article 1 preamble to change with the addition of the following sections, and list 220-1 purpose, 220-1 title, and then follow-up note that says the full text is in the supplemental.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot the exact words we used there, but
Yeah.
so when you go in to vote, you get the ballot and the supplemental text in the full text.
Okay.
So what is it then that procedurally we need to do? Do we need to like have to draft something, or are you talking about the form of which we're taking a vote?
Well, we can't take a vote on this, because I'm not saying put this all on the ballot.
Yeah,
Well, we are entitled to kind of create a topical description of substance, right? I mean, that's the term the RSA uses.
yeah.
So do we vote on the
Yeah.
topical description of substance? Is that what we're voting on to be posted? That would seem to be what we are, right?
Well, I think we'd vote on the topical substance, and that this, as written, would be the full supplemental text, minus the voting guide.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we'd also publish a voting guide, which has all of this plus the voting guide. So we got
Already in.
three documents.
Yeah.
The text for the ballot, the supplemental text for the full article, and the voter's guide, which has all of the above.
How do we incorporate that into the motion and future motions? Do we simply say this once and do we have to vote to do it that way, and then it's understood that every single motion that comes afterwards is gonna be in that same process?
No, I think you should list, sorry, on the ballot should appear section 220-1 purpose, comma, 220-.1.1 title, 1.2 authority,
That should be all on authority?
that should be on the ballot itself.
Okay, and the title.
Then the rest of the text would be on the supplemental text.
Okay.
And we'd vote to approve both.
So purpose, authority, and supplemental text is what you're saying? Purpose, title, supplemental.
Every place that you changed.
It ends with authority.
Actually ends with effective dates.
All right, well. So how are we going to phrase that then? Let's, hypothetically, if we're saying that, I move to post proposed zoning amendment Z25-1 to warrant and say that
I'm trying to remember. if we
Article
did-
1,
How we did it in the past.
well, yeah, I mean, it's,
Because in the past, I can remember just reading them and then we voted to either accept or not accept.
That was it.
And then we could figure it out on the back end what was going to be there and what not, and then you'd have the handout. Because we had one, remember that? Tom, we had one that was like about 15 pages long. We split up reading it one night.
You had last year, you had a long one.
Wasn't that stormwater?
it was stormwater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stormwater.
That was like War and Peace.
Right.
Yeah, it was.
So
Is that, is,
getting to that, we've already done this process, but to move the meeting along and make sure we do it correctly and state it correctly, do we just simply say this is the way we're doing it once, and do we need to vote on that? Or does each draft motion to approve Z25-1, do we have to state blah, 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 and then when we do Z25-2, do we state
Really.
supplemental language will be included in the text? We have to add that to the draft motion language, so that each one has that.
I would.
all right, so again, so I guess I'll, help me out here. I said, I move to
Well,
post.
first, I'll withdraw my motion. I got to withdraw with what
Did you make a motion?
I did.
All right,
So I'm going to withdraw it.
okay.
Yeah, I withdraw it too.
All right. So I move to proposed zoning amendment Z25-1 to the warrant as being recommended by the planning board. And then, what am I saying? To include or to,
Well, I would change the first paragraph to say, as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to Plastow zoning
Could
ordinance,
you just-
Article 1 preamble.
Yeah, could you just use what's right on the front page, right? Where it says Z25-1, Article 1 preamble says amend,
well,
then Article title, then it's got the sections.
Right.
Is that-
all right, so,
enough,
okay,
right?
so
Right.
I move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z25 to the warrant as being recommended by the planning board. Article 1 preamble, amend, Article title 220-1, 220-1.4, new 220-1.1 title, 220-1.2 authority, 220-1-3 severability.
There you go.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Did you include 221-.4 effective dates?
See, I didn't think we
Because you're changing that too.
Yep, that's the effective dates. Yeah, so just add that, and I think we're good.
Just add that to your motion.
All right, so again, I move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z25-1 to warrant being recommended by the planning board. Article 1 preamble amended, Article 1 title 220-1, 220-1.4, new 220-1.1 title, 220-1.2 authority, 220-1.3 severability, 220-1.4 effective dates. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Discussion? Any discussion?
Got it, yeah.
All in favor?
I-
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? 500. Z25,
Can I ask one more question?
yes.
Do we have to do anything with the voter's guide?
Oh, yeah, right.
You should know, the voter's guide will be something different. Legal will definitely take a look at that, sign off on it, and that'll be
Okay,
that.
I'm just, before we move,
All right, that's, no, we're good
Can
there.
we go back to the voter's guide then afterwards?
if it's going to
All
be
right.
later,
Yeah,
we can do it
right.
later.
Okay. Well, sorry for looking at that.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Yep. Z25-4 now?
Z25-3, right?
Oh, that's three.
All right, so Z25-3, proposed Plastow zoning amendment, Z25-3. Are you in favor of the adoption of the amendment number 3 as proposed by the planning board to the Plastow zoning ordinance? 3, general provisions to add the following provisions. All right, this is what's being added. 220-1-17-1 applicability. No person may use or occupy any land or buildings or authorize or permit the use or occupancy of land or structures under their control, except in accordance with all of the applicable provisions of the ordinance. For the purpose of this section, the use or occupancy of a structure or land relates to anything that relates to anything and everything that is done in, on, or to the structure or land. 220-17.8, relationship to the master plan. It is intended that the ordinance implement the planning policies as reflected in the master plan of the town of Plastow, New Hampshire. 220-17.9, computation of time. Unless otherwise specifically provided, the time within which an act is to be done shall be computed by excluding the first day and including the last day. If the last day is a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, that day shall be excluded. 220-17.10, lots recorded prior to the adoption of this ordinance. Any lot as herein defined in the ordinance which was legally recorded at the time of adoption or amendment of the ordinance, which was a buildable lot under the ordinance in effect immediately prior to the adoption or amendment of the ordinance, and which meets current requirements for frontage, shall be deemed to be a buildable lot. In addition, lots created by subdivisions approved by the planning board, which were buildable lots at the time of subdivision and which have frontage on a public street, shall be deemed a buildable lot. 220-17.11, copyright and other restrictions on reproductions. Plans, reports, documents, and other materials submitted to the town or any board, commission, or department to fulfill the requirements of the ordinance, including but not limited to the applications for building permits, variances, special exceptions, site plans, subdivisions, or conditional use permits, shall be free of any restrictions on reproduction proximate to any copyright symbols, reservations of rights, or statements of ownership, shall be an affirmative statement which expressly agrees to reproduction. Plastow zoning amendment Z25-3 voters guide. These additions to Article 3's general provisions are to add customary language found in many New Hampshire zoning ordinance, particularly linking the ordinance to the town's master plan. Is there any comment from the public on this particular zoning amendment before us? Please state your name and
74
your
Main
address.
Street. What's driving the need to do this? How did this even come up?
Maybe from our zoning committee, but just generically
You
speak
want
to
me to take
that.
this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Is essentially, we went a top to bottom review of the entire zoning ordinance and looked at areas where we thought it was either unclear or more ambiguous, and attempted to correct those or make recommendations to correct those. It's the belief of the committee, which Karen and Laurie and I were members of, is that ambiguity and lack of clarity is an enemy to a zoning ordinance, and it disenfranchises the population.
So in this particular case, what's the ambiguity being solved?
Well, none of these were included in the zoning ordinance.
We're never there.
So there was no fundamental, you can't have a zoning ordinance without having a master plan. This didn't, we already had the master plan, we already had the zoning ordinance. This just clarified that there's a linkage without having to go back and read the RSAs.
Okay,
You have any other questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I just see every year, and I don't know whether this sounds maybe positive, but every year there's all these changes that are made that I don't think the general public has any idea how to understand and whether they negatively or positively affect them. I think this is one of them. It's just again, it's kind of, this wasn't included, so I guess where'd the language come from? It just comes from other towns? Is that if the language wasn't there, where does the new language come from? That's customarily within, says customarily within these descriptions, all this language
It came from another zoning ordinance of another town.
from another town.
Which town?
This one was two towns, actually, the town of Bow and the town of Meredith.
I feel it's really the clarity that sometimes is not necessarily very clear and not fair to the townspeople when things come up.
Can you give like an example? I'm just trying to, maybe it's some of the education.
Well, I guess example wise is that everything in red on this particular warrant is what's being added, correct, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, the actual warrant, what's being included here in terms of like applicability and things like that, or copyright and other restrictions on reproduction. I mean, it's not, again, scintillating reading, but in some sense, it's providing, sort of additional clarity about things that you might assume are present in the ordinance, but that's not how necessarily things work. Assumptions can go, if you want to make comment, please come up, speak into the microphone, just so they can be captured. All right, because we can't, yeah, and just give your name and your address. You can speak to this particular ordinance that we're
You
proposing.
just speak it to the microphone, so if you pull a chair out and sit down, it will be easier.
The microphones don't project, they just merely pick up the,
We're just leaning
The
into
audio.
it close, whatever works, whatever's easiest.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. I mean, I've been on committees before, not here, but why now? And what was the impetus for it? And why Bow? And what was the other town, Meredith?
Meredith.
Yeah. So they're not Plastow. So why? I mean, there's got to be something else that drove this. That's how these things work. Was it a person, an incident?
Who's the head of the planning board or zoning board in Bow?
Steve Buckley.
And isn't he sort of the chief counsel to,
He's the chief counsel for the New Hampshire Municipal Association.
yeah, so it's,
And Bow has a population that's roughly proximate within a couple
Well, that-
hundred people to Plastow.
That's fine. Great. But what was the impetus for it? I mean, why? I mean, we were happy town, and no one here on this board, it doesn't affect any of your land. So I think if it
Talking about.
Computation of time, okay, that's in here. If you don't know how time is in terms of an act that has to be done under the ordinance, without us describing how it has to be done, how would you know?
Yes, but what came across your domain for this to be triggered?
Nothing, we looked, we.
Something
took-
had to.
We took a whole fresh look at the zoning ordinance.
Was there a building? Was there something
No.
commercial? Was there
nothing
anything that
personal.
someone said, oh my God, look what's happening to Plastow?
Nothing personal.
This wasn't if you will, a punishment hunting for a crime.
Right.
It was just, things were missing. We as a committee thought it would be better if they were in there. That's it. There's no nefarious motive here. There's
So
nothing.
all of a sudden, someone thought it would be better. Well, I can tell you, after owning something for 60 years and putting my blood, sweat, and money into it, coming here, and also the whole culvert issue, which is just abominable, is, and at this time of year, it's really difficult to come here and do this.
yeah.
So, I might mention while I'm standing up here at this mic, we're sitting here, I'm looking at someone else's phone. I suppose there could have been homework for me, I guess. But why don't you have paperwork for us to look at? I've never been at a meeting where I wasn't allowed to get the stapled paper and kind of review it while you're reviewing it. especially where I'm the taxpayer and landowner, and it may affect me. I don't understand that. You've got something you're looking at.
Would you like,
Sure.
my copy?
Yeah, I'll take it.
I'll just read off of,
I think that gentleman might want to.
That's fine, but just, like I said, it was posted for public hearing in 2 places. And, I hear what you're saying, that perhaps in the future, there should be some staged handouts for people that would like to read it, real time.
Okay, so I don't really know
No, it's fine.
what else I can say other than I question the validity of doing this at this time without something having
No,
triggered it.
it's, when we're reviewing these things, this is over the course of the year. We established 2 subcommittees, all right, one of which was specifically to deal with master plan type things. Now, the master plan for the town of Plastow is a living, breathing document that should be revisited, should be updated and refined, all right? So, I mean, that's what the board is tasked with doing that. In terms of zoning ordinances aren't merely just reactive in terms of like some disaster or something that comes
Right.
up, and therefore we have to do it. But we're being proactive in the sense of reviewing it. If there's some sort of ambiguity or something like that, we should not just react to it, but so proactively seek to eliminate that ambiguity. That last particular, again, the last ordinance that we talked about spoke directly to that. So that as these ordinances, over time, the numbering of something becomes ambiguous.
I understand.
So we want to be able to go back and, let's say, edit something so that it's, without changing the substance of it, but so that it's clear, all right? So if you don't, it just sort of, the errors and the additions sort of just over time aggregate and become sort of cluttered and unintelligible. So again, that was the whole point of having a subcommittee that would just proactively look at these things and propose changes that would be good, as opposed to just being reactive to something. So,
Well, it isn't just a matter of grammatical, it's a matter of what the purpose was.
well, like,
Correct.
for instance, you'll see in there, like, it is grammatical, like on the
I
first one,
understand the
we're changing an
grammatical,
A to a capital A.
Right, I understand
All right,
that.
so I mean, it's, again, not calculating of time, that
But then
sounds,
it's how it's affecting real people and real land. I
Oh.
think that's the important part.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a name like Muir and not worry about giant redwood trees. I mean, I'm part of it. And I'm the caretaker of property that I've had for a lot of years, and my parents had.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand when something can be done, I'm not saying irrationally, I understand the purpose of a document,
Okay.
absolutely. I've written them. But I don't understand the impetus behind it, what triggered it, because something had to. Was there a commercial building that was built? Was there a
no
house in
impetus.
the wrong
Is we
spot?
established a committee to proactively review Plastow zoning and then the recommended changes.
Because I will give you an
enhancements to it.
example. I had a property
Okay.
that, and this could be similar here, that no one wanted, purchased it, and then all of a sudden, the house or the building next door was demoed, and a massive building went up. I mean, literally, it shadowed my property. Oh, well, that was life. It happened. Is that the kind of, it's these kind of things do, and that triggered changes in the town. So now the entire street can put up
Right.
larger buildings. I'm just wondering, is there something like that here?
No, nothing like that at all. And like I said, we need to just talk about the substance of what we're talking about. So I
I'm
mean,
just
like I
trying to
said,
understand.
yeah, so I'm just saying, we're going to move it along to a
Yeah,
vote.
right.
But what I'm saying is that the particular ordinance that we're talking about, the purpose that we described, can I have your copy,
Yep.
please?
You're increasing the frontage of the wetlands.
No, this is a public hearing on this particular.
No, this isn't even about the wetlands.
Yeah, this isn't about, we haven't
Oh,
done
okay,
any
so
of
I'm
that.
wasting my time up here.
Yeah, this
Okay.
isn't about the
In your
wetlands.
time, during this.
Yeah, this is about, because this, I think we had 6 warrant articles that we're going through tonight.
Yeah.
So each one's separate. We
And I'll
haven't
let you
got-
get ahead with it because we're all trying
Well,
to.
you know, when we get to the wetlands, because I'll definitely speak to that
Right, we
before
aren't
it
there
goes to
yet.
the public.
Yeah, so I mean, again,
I'm sorry.
the purpose of this particular one that we're talking about, is Plastow zoning amendment Z25-3. These additions to Article 3's general provisions are to add customary language found in many New Hampshire zoning ordinances, particularly linking the ordinance to the town's master plan. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward on that.
Can't appreciate the explanation. I understand it's adding clarity.
All right, so I move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z25-3 to the warrant as being recommended by the planning board. Article 3, general provisions, new, 220-17.7, applicability, 220-17.8, relationship to master plan, 220-17.9, computation of time, 220-17.10, lots recorded prior to the adoption of the ordinance, 220-17.11, copyright and other restrictions and reproductions. Do I have a second?
I'm sorry, who was the,
I made the motion,
you made it,
yes.
thank you.
I'll second it.
Karen seconds it.
Just one, from a
Discussion.
discussion standpoint, simply housekeeping, when you had initially started the reading, you had said on applicability, you had said 220-17-1.
Point 1 and 0, point 10, you mean?
Yeah, and
Okay.
really that says -7, and really it should say .7,
She-
which you did clarify with this motion, but I just want to be consistent if you just note that per the public reading of
Per the public reading, 220-17.10, lots recorded prior to the adoption of this ordinance.
.7.
Right, point 7. There is no point 7 on here.
Says -7.
It says -7,
-7.
it's .7. It's corrected in the
Yeah.
Okay.
other portion you read, but when you had read it,
Right.
you said -1.
Did I? Okay.
Just want to
I'll
clarify that.
I'll accept your
Not a
critique of it, that I said
Just a
dash
cleanup
instead of
since
point.
it's the public hearing.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right.
After I read it,
That's
Give
okay.
it to you.
No, that's quite all right.
All right.
This one now.
Proposed Plastow zoning amendment Z 25-4.
Aye.
Are you in favor of the adoption of the amendment number 4 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance, Article 5, establishment of districts and district regulations to read as follows? 220-32, district objectives and land use control. The following tables set forth the objectives of each of the districts hereby established and the provisions of the regulations that apply respectively to each district. Any use designated as a permitted use in a particular district may be commenced in such district pursuant to Section 220-33 of this article. Any permitted use designated as special exception in a particular district may be commenced in such district pursuant to Article 20, Section 220-138 of the ordinance. Any use designated as permitted throughout a conditional use permit in any district may be commenced in such district pursuant to the requirements of Article 12, 220-80 of the ordinance. Regulations for lots, classifications of lots, dimension requirements, accessory uses, and application of district regulations as found in Article 5, Sections 220-32 to 220-45, inclusive of the ordinance. The raising of legal crops, keeping of gardens, and using of land for forestry are allowed in all districts and not regulated by the ordinance. 220-33, permitted uses. Permitted uses are those expressly defined uses within the ordinance that are allowed by right, providing the standards established by the ordinance are met. 220-43, temporary structures and uses. Temporary permits may be issued by the building inspector for the period not exceeding 1 year for non-conforming uses incidental to the construction projects, provided such permits are conditioned upon agreement by the owner to remove the structure or use upon expiration of the permit. Such permits may be renewed upon application for additional periods of 6 months each, as long as the construction is active. Temporary structures and uses not incidental to construction projects shall be limited to 180 consecutive days and 180 total days in any calendar year. The building inspector is authorized to issue permits for temporary structures and uses in conformance with the Town of Plasto's building permitting policies and procedures. Temporary structures and uses that are erected and used no more than 16 days in one calendar year shall not be subject to the ordinance. Manufactured housing as defined in section RSA 674:32 may be used as temporary housing on the same parcel during the reconstruction of a dwelling unit destroyed by casualty. Except for manufactured housing, temporary structures may be permitted to be located with a minimum 10 feet side or rear yard. Only uses listed as permitted use in Article 5 of the ordinance are permitted as temporary structure and use, except for events and other temporary use permits permitted by the board. Let me read that again. Except for events and other temporary uses permitted by the Board of Selectmen. All right. 220-32C, C2 Commercial 2 as follows. B, uses, permitted uses. 9, child daycare agency. 9.6, adult daycare program or services. 220-32D, BC or village center as follows. Uses, permitted uses. 7.1, agriculture. 12, child daycare agency. 13, adult daycare program or services. 220-32G, ICR, integrated commercial residential as follows. 2, permitted commercial industrial uses. Child daycare agency, parentheses T, adult daycare program or services, right, deleted as duplicative with Article 9. All that follows. All right, the voter's guide, intent. Plastow zoning amendment Z25-4, voter's guide. The proposed language clarifies the objectives of the ordinances in establish the various districts in the ordinance. 2, establishes the process for issuing permits for temporary structures and uses. 3, clarifies where child daycare agency and adult daycare program or services uses are permitted. And 4, removes duplicative language currently existing in the sign ordinance. All right. Is there any questions from the public on this particular ordinance as it relates to what was just read?
Ryan Lebrecq, 174 Main Street.
Welcome.
So I'm a little confused on the temporary structures and uses. It seems to indicate in the first paragraph that it's temporary structures utilized during a permitted construction project. Is that correct?
Did you say permanent?
Like a permitted construction project.
Sorry. Yes.
It's referring to structures being used during construction.
Yes.
But then the language added in red says temporary structures and uses not incidental to construction projects. So that any temporary structure on any parcel?
It provides the ability to have a temporary structure limited to 180 days that otherwise wasn't in the ordinance.
So what is the definition of a temporary structure?
That's in the definitions. That will be in the next public hearing because that didn't get included in this. So I can.
Well, it's important to this.
Yeah, no. Just the way it works.
So for instance, I have
Let me just get you.
portable garage,
Let's wait.
temporary structure.
I think part of the activity that we did was to be able to tie, the
Yes.
particular ordinances back to
This
definitions
whole
and
thing
things like
gets
that.
tied together. It's just the
So-
way we have.
All definitions.
So the proposed definition of temporary structures and uses, because it's not in the zoning ordinance now, is temporary structures include tents, fabric shelters, portable shelters, construction trailers during permitted construction, and similar structures.
So there are hundreds of temporary structures up on private property all over the city, all over this town currently. If this gets implemented, it's saying that we can only have them up for 180 days a year.
Yeah.
Shelter Logic Garage.
Was that permitted as a garage? I mean, you'd have to go back.
It's a temporary, it's a tent.
Did they get a building permit?
I don't think anybody gets building permits for them, nor should you have to. It's a tent.
Well, if you're using it as a structure, under the current definition of structure in the zoning ordinance, it's
Right.
anything.
So nobody's getting permits for these things. I guarantee that.
Just
And they're up everywhere.
The law, the ordinance right now is anything is a structure. Your mailbox is a structure. That's in the definition now.
So if this passes and I have a pipe framed, covered with a tarp, temporary garage for as long as it lasts, you're saying right now I'm supposed to get a building permit to even have it. And two, moving forward, if this is accepted, I can only have it up 180 days of the year.
That's the way the ordinance is written, yes.
Yes, it's 6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
So half the year.
All right, so this is ridiculous.
No, it's not ridiculous.
Yes, it
It's
is.
a definition of a temporary structure. You're saying that you want a permanent structure, but
No.
we're defining what a temporary structure is.
No, I'm saying that these structures are all over the city currently, and they're up year round. No one takes them down and puts them back up. They take days to put up.
Okay.
And by implementing this, it's basically saying that everybody that has one of these up is immediately illegal after 180 days from whenever this gets implemented. It's creating yet another HOA provision under the town of Plastow,
All right,
preventing me from using my property in the way I want.
So that's your comment on it. I think it's been adequately responded to. I think ideologically, it's, that you have zoning, all right, and we have definitions, okay? If you're saying that you don't want to have zoning and you don't want definitions and you want to do whatever you want, then that's.
No, that's not what I'm
No,
saying.
Wait, let me finish. Then you're saying that's an ideological position, that's fine. And, we could take that into account.
It's not ideological, it's an actual situation that's going to affect
Right.
hundreds of people in this town that
Right.
have existing structures that they're utilizing. By the way, that they put up, because if they put up permanent buildings, we get taxed to oblivion for having the structures. So
Again.
by overtaxing us,
One at a time. So-
we are
so make
putting
your
these
point.
up instead.
You get to respond to your point. You don't get to.
That's fine, you can respond to the
So,
point.
well, I guess you don't have a problem with the definition, it's with the 180 days.
Correct.
That's really, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
And I understand where you're coming from. Because
They're everywhere,
there
not just
are,
me.
there are quite a bit. I know they tend to start to go up, definitely over through the winter, right? You see more of them.
If I lived in a warm environment, I
No,
wouldn't,
you
I
would
wouldn't
too.
have them.
I get it's a shelter to put over it. And I know what it is, and it's not a permanent structure. I know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people do have them.
All right.
And businesses and residential,
Yeah.
not construct, I have no problem with this if it's pertaining to, which is the first part of the article, which pertains to construction projects. Basically saying you put up a temporary structure that you're utilizing during construction, you can't leave it up there forever. Once the project's done, it's temporary to facilitate the construction. But it's now adding definition that is extending this to every lot in the town. And That I don't agree with, for sure.
All right.
Well, the good thing is we provided the definition, and the townspeople can vote whether they want or don't want to see these.
Yeah, because currently.
All these get voted in every time because no one reads them. No one understands them. And it's the unfortunate, it's unfortunate.
One at a time.
That's not
One at a
necessarily
time.
pertinent to
Mr.
this.
Alberti, you get to speak,
Yeah,
please,
I'm just
without being
saying, this
interrupted.
is, now we have a definition, it's very clear.
Yep.
And now the townspeople can vote. That's,
Yeah.
that's the way it goes.
So this adds to the, if you have a home-based business, you can't have more than 2 vehicles signed in a yard. It just further limits everybody's ability to use their property peacefully in a manner that, I mean, some of these shelters cover storage of junk. So, okay, take the shelter down, you're gonna have a pile of crap. And if I'm forced to, I would be the type of person, I will have a pile of crap delivered to my front yard on Main Street just to prove a point.
Anything else you want to add to this particular?
No, this is doing exactly what I thought it was doing, and I thought this planning board was attempting to be different than previous boards in the past.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing?
One last thing before. Go ahead.
Just read the current definition of structure. You know, if you think this is worse than that. Just go read it. It's your zoning ordinance.
All right.
Because guess what? Everything is illegal right now. Everything.
I'm sure you didn't even have that stuff up.
So
All right.
that's what we're trying to fix.
All right. All right. Any other discussion? Particular?
The only thing
Ordinance.
I'm wondering, is there a way for these like temporary, basically it's a temporary garage really is what it is, right? Is there any way we can put something in that would give them a chance to come in and get at least a variance or something so they could keep it up? How would we do that?
Well, every ordinance does allow,
I know that, but I'm just trying to figure out what the remedy would
is
be.
that correct, Tim? Like,
Is there a condition, is this fall under like some sort of conditional use of any kind?
Yeah, I
Granted.
mean, you can apply for variance for any of the zoning.
But I'm looking at it, you could have a lot of people coming before the ZBA for this.
Well, if we're trying to tweak this, do we tweak it with like a specific, like a garage, just?
Yeah, that's what, I'm kind of thinking that, because, I mean, to this point, I get Ryan's point, right? It does cover up a lot. You could have, a pile of wood pallets. I think the temporary garage looks a lot better than a pile of wood pallets in someone's property.
They're gonna see everybody doing that.
yeah, I mean, to your point, the good thing is we have a definition, right? Like whether you fundamentally agree with
Right.
whether you want your neighbor to have a scraggly looking temporary structure, or excuse me, what we define as temporary structure or not. I mean, we're all gonna have our own opinions about that.
Yeah.
That comes with the vote on it. So,
If you want to speak, you can come up and speak at the mic and be recognized.
Because
But,
it's also assuming that these things
all
are.
right,
scraggly
hey,
looking. They're
just
not.
come on.
I'm
I'll
here.
let you speak, but I'm
That's
not gonna,
fine.
but you're not gonna
Yeah,
disrupt.
continue.
no, you don't need to point
Okay.
to me because, I'm just having an open discussion with the board.
It's fine.
And I said,
Tom.
we are going to decide if we
Right.
like or not that these things are allowed. That's simply all I'm saying.
All right. Do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I take offense to calling things scraggly looking. Some people, they are scraggly looking because they let them fall over, they let them be in decay, the tarps are flapping in the wind.
Right.
And other people maintain their stuff, no different than people maintain their houses, and some people don't maintain their houses.
Fair enough.
That's all.
So in terms of having a definition, I mean, what we're saying, you're defining what a temporary structure is. Okay, so I mean, if the objection is that you have a temporary structure and you want the structure not to be temporary and you just want to be able to put something up that whatever you want and call it permanent, I mean, seems to be what we're
You can
talking
get a
about.
building permit.
Well, that's, so.
Excuse me, may I address?
If you'd like to come up and speak at the mic, and then your name, your address, and such, just for the record.
I seem to be somewhat low here. My name is Eric Bell, 4 Tracy Lane. I appreciate that there's an openness to try to define this a little further and to incorporate something that takes into account what I would say are, at minimum, neighbors of a person who has a temporary shelter, to dress it up in a fashion. Very briefly, if you wanted to sell your house after you've lived in this town for 40 years and your neighbor decides to have something in their backyard or on their side that is an eyesore in their opinion, the person who wants to move, you feel that your house is being potentially marred in its value. So in your effort now to try to deal with this, I'm saying I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're open to now trying to find a way of giving some latitude to people to dress up, for want of a better term. Please do find a way of doing that. The situation I'm articulating is one that I know happens with a number of people. In the area that I live, I'll be very brief about this, in the area that I live, there's 2 or 3 properties. To me, I would call them eyesores and have got to be dragging down the value of their neighbors' properties. Some people don't care about it, some people do. I think our town is better served when we try to take care of our town, but it's a matter of opinion as to what that means. I understand that. So do try and find some way of adding to this. We're here to help try to talk this through as well, if that matters. I hope it does. May I say at least, the issue that I've cited, the way I've tried to present it, is how I'm interpreting this at the end of the day. And you, Mr. Coy, have tried to really open that up, and I appreciate that. Okay, for the moment, I'm going to say that's my comment on this. Any question about what I've said? Okay, no. Thank you.
Thank you.
That just silenced all of you.
No, I just,
Well, no, we're just going back and reading it.
Is the only, I don't think you can fix it in here.
okay.
You're gonna have to look at the definition, which is still a work in process.
So we're gonna talk about the definition at the next one, right?
Well, we'll talk about it tonight, going,
Correct, but that's when the
Yes.
public hearing's gonna
Yes.
be.
yes.
So if we're gonna try to address it in the definition, maybe the best thing to do is let's move this one and we'll do this at the next public hearing to vote on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Do we have the appropriate time? frame
Yeah,
for
that's what I'm,
Right,
public
exactly.
posting?
We have a
well, the
time
next
frame.
one's January 15th,
Correct.
so we're voting on things tonight, so we have the time.
Yeah. So we just add this to the next public hearing. That way they can get the definition to maybe tie it in a little
Well,
bit better.
that's the struggle with all of these. is
I-
you have a
I-
fair amount of definitions sitting there that are proposed,
So if we were to consider this one for January 15th,
What are we going to do now?
well,
Well, I think really,
I mean, I just don't want to move something to January 15th. I don't want to move something to January 15th,
well, I think this one here,
moving it.
it should probably be a quick one, I'm hoping, if the definition gets changed to something. Because then you'll prove that they go together. It's just my thought. I'm only one
Is
person.
there, well, I mean, I don't think it's inappropriate to talk about what the definition is, just sort of a preview in the sense, if we're referencing.
No,
the
there
fact-
isn't, but if we want to kind of.
No, I'm just saying right now, if we want to just talk about it
Well,
for a second
it's-
more before
yeah.
we move on.
Well, it's,
Fine.
I mean, we have the language, this goes in conjunction with what we did with structure, which was define that so it doesn't include anything and everything. And it doesn't, right now, anything in the town that's in that broad definition of structure requires a building permit. And I know people aren't pulling building permits, but so
Okay.
it's everything.
So the argument then becomes that, yes, people right now are doing something that they ought to be pulling a building permit for, and that this here rather is allowing for
It's trying to,
something that's,
trying to work in conjunction
yeah,
with.
as opposed to like, I mean, right now, if somebody had some sort of structure covering a pile, that somebody could technically show up and go, that's illegal. All right. And this here is actually providing a mechanism for saying that, no, wait, you can have a temporary structure for 180 days covering a pile. That it's not going to have the building inspector show up and say it's illegal. Right, so now if the argument is that somebody wants to be able to have piles of stuff with tarps and things like that distributed everywhere in perpetuity and not have anyone say anything about it and say that they should be allowed to do it, that I think that's more of an ideological position, that I get to do whatever I want without any type of oversight, zoning, or anything like that. And I don't know if I'm sympathetic to that type of, sort of Western type territory argument. That's,
Like personally, I wouldn't have, I'm not voting tonight, I wouldn't have any problem with moving this to the 15th and taking a relook at the definition of temporary structure.
we could, I mean, I'd be amenable to that, but I'm almost thinking, that just as I said it out loud, that, I mean, if the idea is what's being protected, it's that nothing's being taken away. In fact, it's just sort of clarifying something that if somebody has a pile of something and it's temporary in their mind, then you're saying that the building inspector could come in right now and say that you take it down, or
According to the ordinance.
according to the ordinance. So it isn't, so nothing's being deprived. It's actually just sort of clarifying that if you wanted to do something, that you could do it for 180 days, rather than just having somebody in your mind arbitrarily coming in and saying that you can't do that on your property, you can't do that on your property, you can't do that on your property.
That was certainly part of the intent.
Okay. Yeah, so if talking about the definition somehow clarifies some part of it, I don't know if that, in my mind, it seems that this is pretty clear. So I'm just the way I phrased it. I don't know if anyone agrees.
Well, part of our job here is to obviously listen to the, the public,
Right.
How many or how few there are, and see if there's things that, that as we start to look at what's going on.
Right. So I mean, if the argument it just merely is that I don't want the planning board articulating or clarifying aspects of things because you don't like the planning board articulating, clarifying things, then that's an ideological position as opposed to a particular criticism. So do you have anything new and additional to add to the debate that we had?
Yeah, I don't think it's clarifying, it's limiting. So you can say that a building permit may be required to put one of these up currently, and that may be the case. I don't know.
You just said it is.
That's fine.
I can read the ordinance to you.
That's fine. But this is also saying not only is a building permit needed, but you can only use them for half the year. People store motorcycles, they store boats, they store cars, they store all kinds of things, work in them. They cover equipment. People that have home-based businesses have lots of equipment that are sheltered in these things, et cetera. They make people's yard look better, not worse, in my opinion. And if the property taxes weren't where they are, then less of them would exist, absolutely, and I've made that argument before. I would build a large structure in my backyard, and I may do that anyway, but I would prefer to have a permanent structure, but I don't want to pay the property taxes on it. So it's these things are being used
An
all.
ideological position. You don't want
That's
to pay
fine.
the property tax on it. Okay, well, all right.
Right, exactly.
But,
Exactly.
so it's an ideological position.
And,
Right.
and a further, and it's coming up later, I'm being limited on how I can use my property more and more.
Right.
And even the ability to build the building that I want may go away based on other ordinances that are trying to be passed as well. So,
Right.
You're
not speaking.
these things
you're not
affect a lot of
speaking-
people.
You're not speaking to the ordinance in
It
question.
applies to both.
All right.
So if the definition of temporary structure removes that as being a temporary structure, then fine. But if it applies to anything other than a structural steel, wood frame building, a permanent building on a foundation, then it's again, creating an HOA in the city. The Town of Plastow Homeowners Association, which is what the planning board has been doing. We limit
Right.
shipping containers, we limit, amount of signed vehicles, we limit all kinds of things that, it's not the Wild West. It's not the Wild West.
Taking me out of context, but all right, I think we understand what you're saying.
And maybe we can define temporary structures, maybe in workable, usable condition or something to prevent those types of things where a structure is falling down and just left there that look like crap.
All right, let me stop you there for a minute then. So then perhaps, for the sake of, we do move it to the 15th, all right? If we review definitions in conjunction with it, if it makes sense that it can be, sort of address some of these questions that are being put to us. I think that makes sense. I mean,
That's the only place to do it.
yeah, that'd be the only place to do it. So then, but like I said.
This
I
could
think-
even apply to a small temporary greenhouse for someone that does gardening in their backyard.
Does right
Pipes
now.
and plastic
The ord-
sheets.
The ordinance does right now.
That's fine.
Applies to all of that.
Yeah,
It requires.
Yeah,
building
I don't see, again, before we move on, I don't see it as being limiting. It's merely clarifying that everything that you've objected to would be subject to a building inspector or zoning official showing up and just saying, you can't have that, you can't have that, you can't have that. This allows you to have that, right? So, we can.
For
we can-
half a year.
As opposed to saying you can't have it ever. Get rid of it. It's illegal.
You don't put these up for 6 months and take them down.
Well, again, that's an ideological
I
position.
just spent 3 weeks putting one up
Okay, that's fine.
and thousands of dollars.
It's an ideological position. that you
And it
wanna
looks
be able
better
to
than a
put
lot of
these
people's
stuff and leave them
houses.
there. That's good. All right. So do we agree? Do we have a consensus of the board maybe that this particular ordinance be considered with the definition on the 15th?
Because I
Does that
think,
make sense?
and I think if we go with the definition, this will be quick, right?
Right. I mean, or, what do you think, Tim?
Yeah, you should officially continue this public hearing to January 17th at 6:30,
Thank you.
second floor, Town Hall.
We'll be continuing this public hearing for
Okay.
Z25-04, 6:30, second floor, Town Hall. There'll be no further notice about that continuance. This is your notice.
January what?
January 17th?
15.
15th.
15th.
15th. Jeez, man.
I didn't know whether we might have to do like we did last year. Obviously, January 1st, we can't do it.
Correct.
But then the 8th, remember we did something like that? We did take the second week because we were missing the first meeting. Well, we did it on the second week and the third week, if you needed the time.
I don't think we need the time.
Okay.
Yep. The only thing you'd have to do if we decided to do it is just to make sure the room was available. That's all. But it can be done.
All right, Z2507. All right. Proposed Plastow zoning amendment Z25-7. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number 7 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance Article 12, reserved to replace Article 12 in its entirety with the following? Right. Article 12, conditional use permits. 220-80, authority. Pursuant to RSA 674:21, the planning board is hereby authorized to grant a conditional use permit to allow for a conditional use in those districts indicated in Article 5. Conditional use permits, as herein provided for, shall be deemed to be permitted uses in their respective districts, subject to the satisfaction of the requirements and standards set forth herein, in addition to all other requirements and standards of the ordinance. All such cases are hereby declared to possess characteristics of such unique and special form that each specific permitted use shall be considered as an individual case. The applicant shall bear the burden of persuasion through the introduction of sufficient evidence through testimony or otherwise that the development, if completed as proposed, will comply with this article and will satisfy the specific requirements for permitted use contained in the ordinance. A conditional use permit shall not establish a use not expressly permitted by the ordinance. 220-80.1, existing uses. The provision of this article shall not apply to any lawfully existing uses. For purposes of this article, the term lawfully existing means any lawful pre-existing conforming use and any pre-existing non-conforming use which predated the adoption of this article by the local legislative body. All other existing non-conforming uses not lawfully existing as defined above shall be required to make application for relief, permitted or approval as shall be required within 6 months from the date of adoption of this article by the local legislative body. 220-81, Planning Board to administer. Wherever a conditional use is authorized by the ordinance, the authority of the administer or grant conditional use permits shall be vested in the Planning Board. 220-82, application and review procedure. An application for a conditional use shall be initiated by filing with the Planning Board for an application for a conditional use permit. The following procedures shall apply to processing of such application. A, procedure, if subdivision or site plan approval also required. Where other required development approvals for a conditional use include subdivision or site plan approval by the Planning Board, the application and review procedure for a conditional use permit shall be made concurrently and in accordance with the procedures specified in the subdivision and site plan review regulations as applicable to the particular development. B, procedure if subdivision or site plan approval not required. Where no subdivision or site plan approval would otherwise be required for the conditional use, the application and procedural requirements of the subdivision and site plan regulation shall be applied to the application and processing of conditional use permits with respect to content of applications, requirements for public notice, hearings, and timings of decisions by the Planning Board. 220-83, burden of persuasion. The applicant bears the burden of persuasion through the introduction of sufficient evidence through testimony or otherwise that the development, if completed as proposed, will comply with this article and will satisfy the specific requirements for the use contained in the ordinance. 220-84, standards applicable to all conditional use permits. In reviewing an application of a conditional use permit, the Planning Board shall consider the following information in its deliberation as applicable to the case. A, specific authorization for the conditional use is permitted within Article 5. B, the compliance of the plan with the specific standards for such permitted use contained in the ordinance. C, the results of any special investigative or scientific studies prepared in association with the proposed development. D, special reports or analysis of the project or its impacts prepared by the town's departments, its consultants, its boards or commissions. E, the findings, goals, and objectives of the master plan. F, the relationship of the development to the timing, location, and cost of public improvements scheduled in the town capital improvements program. G, testimony and evidence introduced at the public hearing on the application. H, the compliance with the specific conditions for the conditional use established within the ordinance, i.e. wetlands. I, there are no existing violations of the ordinance on the lot. J, the proposed use will not cause or contribute to a significant decline in property values of adjacent properties. And K, the following impacts have been mitigated to the extent practical: noise, light, traffic, visual effects, and odors. 220-85, hearing and decision. Following a public hearing on the proposed use, the Planning Board shall issue a conditional use permit if it finds, based on the information and testimony submitted with respect to the application, that A, the use is specifically authorized by Article 5 as a conditional use. B, if completed as proposed by the applicant, the development in its proposed location will comply with all requirements of this article and with the specific conditions or standards established in the ordinance for the permitted use. C, the use will not materially endanger the public health, welfare, or safety. D, the use will be compatible with the neighborhood and with adjoining or abutting uses in the area in which it is to be located. E, the use will not have a substantial adverse impact on highway or pedestrian safety. F, the use will not have a substantial adverse impact on the natural and/or financial resources of the town. G, the use will adequately the uses will adequately serviced by necessary public utilities and community facilities and services of a sufficient capacity to ensure the proper operation of the proposed use, and will not necessitate excessive public expenditures to provide sufficient additional capacity of services. 220-85.1, stipulations of approval. A, in granting a conditional use permit, the planning board may attach reasonable conditions to its approval, including but not limited to the performance guarantees and the phasing of a development where such conditions are shown to be necessary to further the objectives of the ordinance or the master plan, or which would otherwise allow the general conditions of this article to be satisfied. B, representations made at a public hearing or in material submitted to the planning board by an applicant to obtain a conditional use permit shall be deemed conditions of the issuance of the permit. All of the conditions of approval shall be stated in writing in the permit. C, the planning board may require that such conditions be annotated on a site plan or subdivision plan if applicable, or otherwise recorded at the Rockingham County Register of Deeds. 220-85.2, building permits for conditional use permits. A building permit for a conditional use permit shall not be issued by the building inspector or their duly appointed representative until a conditional use permit has been approved by the planning board, who shall first be satisfied that all the standards and conditions of this article and the ordinance have been met. 220-85.3, termination and transferability. Once granted a conditional use permit with its terms and conditions shall, A, run with the lot and/or structure or use and shall not be affected by changes in the ownership unless otherwise provided in the ordinance, i.e. home operation. B, terminate 12 months from the date, let me read that again. B, terminate 12 months from the date of planning board authorization if the authorized use is not begun. 1, unless otherwise contained in the conditions of approval, and 2, unless the applicant can demonstrate good reasons or reason at a public hearing before the planning board why the permit should be extended. C, terminate after 12 consecutive months of non-use. 220-85.3, revocation. In the event of a violation of any of the provisions of this article, or in the event of a failure to comply with any prescribed condition of approval or stipulations placed upon such approval, the building inspector, zoning officer, and/or the code enforcement officer shall suspend any conditional use permit immediately, shall notify the planning board, and shall set a date for a hearing to determine if such suspensions shall be lifted or if the conditional use permit shall be revoked in accordance with the provisions of RSA 676:4-A. The planning board shall be the hearing body. In the case of a revocation of a conditional use permit, the determination of the planning board shall be final unless recourse is sought in court of competent jurisdiction. 220-85.3, waivers. The planning board may grant a waiver from a specific section of the conditional use permit in a special case when A, the strict application will result in a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties or exceptional and undue hardship upon the owner of the affected property, or B, an alternative design approach which meets the purpose of the ordinance equally well or better than the compliance with the existing standards and conditions. In either of the foregoing circumstances, the waiver may be granted so that justice may be done and the public interest secured, provided that such waiver will not have the effect of nullifying the intent and purposes of this article, the ordinance, subdivision, and site plan review regulations, or the master plan. The planning board shall approve or disapprove waivers based on the evidence presented to it in each specific case. 220-85.4, appeals. Any person aggrieved by the planning board decision on a conditional use permit may appeal that decision to the Superior Court as provided in the manner provided by RSA 677:15. Planning board decision on the issuance of a conditional use permit cannot be appealed to the Zoning Board of Adjustments, RSA 676:5. Roman numeral 3. Plastow zoning amendment, okay, this is yes, the Voter's Guide. Plastow zoning amendment to Z25-7 Voter's Guide. This establishes a permitted innovative land use tool for the planning board to use in overseeing permitted use development within the town. This creates a layer of non-site plan oversight for those permitted uses that may require more scrutiny to make sure issues such as noise, light, traffic, visual effect, etc., are appropriately addressed in establishing the permitted conditions. We just ask any discussion from the board before we invite the public to have comment.
I've got nothing.
Yeah, do you want to give any additional color to this?
Well, this particularly came in as we've had to deal with the statutory requirements of HB 1567, family group daycare and family home daycare, because those are permitted through conditional use. Our ordinance had no general conditional use statute, you know. We do provide for conditional use permitting through wetlands and the Aquifer Protection District, but we had no general, this establishes that. But it was designed for two things, the kind of daycare aspect and then what we've kind of done with home operations.
I think we've discussed conditional use permits as a whole as a mechanism that allows an applicant to get approvals or requested approval for something that otherwise they would have had to go to like a ZBA for a variance, right? Is that's right, Tim?
Or a special exception is more like it.
So,
Tim, thoughts,
It's
reflections?
one of three ways: variance, special exception, or conditional use.
Anyone else? I invite the public if they want to come up and provide comment or anything along these lines specific to this particular amendment long amendment that had to be read continuously.
Eric Bell, 4 Tracy Lane. I'm trying to understand a point or two regarding this, and I lack the wider understanding about this. So I'd like to define my question with an example. I have a home. Neighbor abutting me wants to build some kind of a shelter so they can bring vehicles in that are part of their business in order to work on those vehicles. Now, I'm referring to large vehicles, not small vehicles, not a Corvette or something like that. You know, it's a box trucks, okay? My neighborhood is zoned residential, and their business is not a home business. Their business is a commercial venture. To me, if they wanted to build that, they'd have to go through the normal permitting process, and they should be denied, in my opinion, because it's a residential neighborhood. Now, I'm asserting certain things. Through the conditional process, could they potentially get a permit? And if they could get a permit, according to this section, and this is why I'm addressing it to you here, is if I have an objection to it and didn't know they came to the planning meeting, they don't have to inform me. I don't see anything about them having to inform me. I'd have to go to the court in order to deal with this, if I'm reading this correctly. And now I'm trying to ascertain if I am reading it correctly.
Let's take it, let's chunk it out a little bit. The first scenario where it sounds like you're arguing that somebody's having a permitted use to do something, a use that's not permitted in a particular zoned area. And I think this says that you can't get a conditional use permit for something that's specifically prohibited or in that.
It works the other way. It's this is a permissive zoning ordinance, so you can only do the things that you are permitted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not permitted to run a mechanic shop,
Yeah.
you're not permitted. This doesn't cleanse you
Okay.
to make it. And as far as notice for hearings, you would be in a butter if it was your next door neighbor.
Yes.
You would get notice.
That's my next question. That's my
process.
next question on that. In terms of issuing a conditional use permit, is the abutter notice type mechanism applies, correct?
During the public
Should,
application
yeah.
process, and a butter should be noticed.
Yeah,
Right, should be.
And if part of that application process is a conditional use request, then it's part of the public
All
hearing.
right, so that goes to both points that you just, I think that you just brought up.
it's actually in this.
Mhm.
So that would be a conditional use that doesn't require a site plan because it's residential use. So it has to follow the town's application process, the notice process, the hearing.
Okay.
It's in here.
Is it at, I'm saying I didn't actually see it in there, and that's an omission on my part, if you can find it for me.
That's in 22082. It says application and review procedure.
Yeah.
And if you go to B, it's procedure of subdivision or site plan approval not required.
That 22082, okay.
I know it's a little off topic. Tim, is there any scenario where, I mean, sounds like on its face, something in that situation would be a zoning violation and code enforcement should be involved.
Right.
Unless that was a sort of quote unquote grandfathered use on that property, which we have in town, right? Certain auto body shops that are in residential zoning on Main Street and whatnot have quote unquote grandfathered approval to operate in such a manner. So unless it's that, are those the two scenarios, Tim? One is either a grandfathered use or one is a violation of zoning, correct?
Could have got a variance.
Yeah.
Or got a variance. Yeah.
And may I say, by getting a variance, the butters would be notified?
That's true. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
They should be notified.
Okay.
So that speaks to, does that adequately speak to both points that you brought
I
up?
believe it does, but I just wanted to ask you again, you said 22282 B, right.
Procedure of if subdivision or site plan approval not
Approval not
required.
required.
So that-
Right, okay.
It just says you have to follow the application and procedure
Okay.
requirements of the subdivision, which requires notice.
Okay, very good, thank you.
It's a good example of exactly how this would come into play for a real life situation. I think you kind of touched on it, but I wasn't sure. You mentioned the home care agency or.
Well, so we can talk about that. So say someone wanted to open up a family daycare, and it's called a family daycare home and a family group daycare home. So in a family daycare home, you can take, essentially 6 kind of underage, if you will. There's certain definitions in the state, and up to 9 kind of school age, up to 3 school age for a total of 9. In a family group daycare home, you can, that number increases to about 18. The state of New Hampshire just allowed them to be permitted by right in every residential district in the town. And so either by right or through conditional use. What we've done is created the conditional use so that at least the planning board is looking at the noise, the odor, and the impacts on the neighborhood, and by the statute, we can't create a mini site plan review. We have to look at this as a quote conditional use and permitted within these districts.
Right, so in your particular case, it sounds like it would not require the site plan, but therefore then use the codicil's outline in that case.
The conditional use.
The conditional
yes.
use of it, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So that there's a level of scrutiny or involvement, not as a tool to prevent it, but at least to manage the process.
very good, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? All right. And then, this is. Yes, we're getting ready to vote.
Conditional use permits.
All right, so 7. So I move the proposed zoning amendment Z25-7 to the warrant as being recommended by the planning board. Article 12, reserved, replaced with new 220-80 through 220-85.4. Do I have a second?
Second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, 500. Z2509.
I think it's 8.
8, sorry.
Have the yellow punch drunk after reading.
Yeah, it's, the vision is going
See
right
it
now.
in your dreams.
Right. Where the heck is it? Okay. All right, all right. Proposed Plastow zoning amendment Z25-8. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number 8 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance, Article 4, Natural Resources Protection, Section 220-18.3-D, Wetland Buffers and Setbacks Table by amending the prime wetlands buffers as follows. Limited use buffer, 50 feet. Parking and structure setback, 100 feet. Wastewater system setback, 100 feet. Plastow zoning amendment Z25-8 Voters Guide. At the December 7th, 2023 public hearing regarding wetlands, several butters pointed out the large impact the proposal would have on abutters. In response to those abutter concerns, the planning board is recommending the proposed buffer size for the limited use buffer be reduced to 50 feet. The parking and structure setback to be reduced to 100 feet, and the proposed buffer size for wastewater system setback to be reduced to 100 feet. All right. Any comments?
Yeah, the
The
one,
voter's
Discussion.
guide indicate that it was at one point, and I'll just use arbitrary numbers, 40 feet, and now we're saying 50 feet, like, you know what I mean?
You want to say what it was originally reduced
Originally.
from?
Changed from to,
Yep.
I don't know, I'm just asking you guys if,
We're going to discuss for a little bit, and then
That's fine.
I'll ask the public to reject.
because the voter's guide is a little unclear as to what the change was based on, because it references the abutter concerns on the December 7th meeting, but it doesn't really say.
All right. Tim, the Conservation Committee, what was originally proposed before we?
It was 100, 100.
It was 125. The limited use buffer, I think, was 100, but not sure of that.
So it was actually recommended to reduce it from 100 to 50,
and that should be easy enough to look up.
25 to 100, okay.
All right, so the argument is that just for the voter's guide, perhaps it would be best or sort of illuminating to indicate what it was reduced from.
Was reduced, right.
The impact was reduced, yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Yep, one thing, I did make sure there was a question posed to the assessor, because that was a big thing about, abatements. From what I was told for the abatements, the dollar amount would actually be very minimal,
Of course, Mrs.
very minimal to almost nothing, depending on each property, right? The way the land is looked at, because you have the structure in the land, that's how it will be looked at. I posed that question because that was a legitimate question everybody had, right?
Well, was your question about, it's not a structure, it's like there's wetland.
Correct.
And the wetland is deemed to be
Buildable.
buildable, then the abatement would be for whatever percentage.
Correct, it would be
Okay.
very minimal.
But it'd be on a case-by-case basis.
Correct, but I'm just saying, as a rule, looking at them, be very minimal. Obviously, each property would be depending on how big
Right.
your property was. But I think that's an important
What
thing
do
to
you,
have
mean-
out
what do you
there.
mean by minimal? I mean, I know specifically, I have wetland, unusable wetlands on my property, and I know specifically what, the abatement is.
Right, but you already have the difference in the footage here.
Okay.
You're not looking at a whole lot of money in abatements.
All right, so you're saying that in terms of the buffers, you're saying the way the buffers are defined, it's not, at least from the assessor's point of view, it's not resulting in like a large amount of
Right.
unusable land.
Right.
Okay. All right.
So I just wanted to make sure that was out there.
But again, for anyone who's maybe listening or what, it's worth clarifying that in terms of if there's a question about property that's not usable because you have wetlands, whether or not they're prime wetlands or not, that's an individual question that you should address with the assessor. So make an appointment with the assessor, and then each situation is going to be different, and facts, circumstances, and such. So it's not something that's uniquely tied to a prime wetland question. All right. So anyone else? Dan?
I'm a little bit uncomfortable on this one, being untethered to the proposed ordinance on the acceptance of the wetlands map. Shouldn't a discussion of these be together? Because we're kind of putting the cart a little bit before the horse, aren't we?
I mean, haven't we already done that? I mean, hasn't Plasta already adopted a prime wetlands ordinance in zoning right now?
It is in zoning right now.
Right. So you have an ordinance right now where we've adopted it. We just don't have a map. And now we're also,
Aren't we adopting, don't we have to adopt the map?
Right. I thought we had to adopt that.
we do. And I think that's.
And don't we have to do that through the ordinance? Or are we doing it through the general warrant?
I think it's being done through a general warrant, isn't
Just
it?
through the general warrant.
General warrant, all right then.
And that's on the 15th,
But
I believe.
that's, my question is irrelevant.
No, I think it goes to a lot. I mean, this has been sort of a long process, 3
Well,
years.
if it's going through-
It's been sort of piecemeal where we've adopted the prime wetlands. Now we're talking about buffers, and then there's a map that,
But let me ask procedure, how can we adopt it? We don't have anything to do with the general warrant. Right? Because if it's the general warrant, it's otherwise amendable, right?
I don't know what the
So,
mechanism.
Our hearing on the 15th is the planning board hearing. We can only deal with planning board issues. And we're only dealing with zoning amendments.
So logically, what is the planning board being asked to do logically with respect to the map? That's warrant.
There's, three things you have to do to establish prime wetland. One is have a public hearing, which we had a couple weeks ago. Third, or second rather, is at town meeting, you have to have an article where the town votes to adopt certain designated wetlands as prime wetlands. And if that passes, then the DES, Department of Environmental Services, has to approve. We have to send stuff to DES and they have to approve it. So the article that needs to be put forth for the prime wetlands to go forward is language that says, does the town vote to adopt prime wetlands as designated by the map? I don't know if I get the exact language.
Okay. So is our role to vote it up or down, or is it just merely to endorse or not endorse? Meaning it's going to appear on the warrant. It sounds like that's what you're saying, and we're just sort of endorsing it. Are we being asked to vote it up or down, or whether or not we want to post it to warrant?
Didn't the selectmen find through their attorney, they thought the planning board should.
Yes, that was last year we put it back, it went back to the.
All right, so this it isn't just a matter of us sort of ministerially endorsing or not endorsing. We're actually voting to say, let's put this before the town as a warrant. So, I mean, we could vote it down if we wanted to.
I think so.
It's not going to be amendable at deliberative or anything, right?
Well, deliberative, and nothing on the planning board goes to deliberative. It's just the Board of Selectmen's warrants. That's the only thing that's discussed.
Right.
All right, so I guess that's the answer. That is that on the 15th, we'll be asked to vote on warrant for accepting the designation of certain wetlands as prime wetlands or as indicated on a map. So that's on the 15th, right? So
I'm just still fuzzy as to what it is.
the map,
Well, not the map. I'm well versed on the map since it runs along my property. It's what are we voting on? We're voting to amend the zoning ordinance? You know, the answer is probably going to be no. Then what does the planning board otherwise vote on?
Are we treating it like a citizen's petition, or are we treating it like it's
Well,
something
that's,
that we draft?
that would be a petition to amend the zoning ordinance, you know?
I mean, but that, the question is the designations of certain wetlands as prime wetlands, right? As embodied by what's designated on a map.
Yeah, 'cause it's amending the prime wetland buffers, right?
Well, the two things, right? Today, this one here is the buffers. The one that we're talking about right now, okay, excuse me,
Sorry.
yeah, what we're talking about right now, the one before us here is the size of the buffers. What's happening on the 15th is the adoption of certain designated wetlands as prime wetlands as represented on the map, correct?
Right.
Okay, so.
What I'm just saying is, shouldn't they be together?
Thoughts on that, Tim?
I think they're, yeah, I mean, they could be together. I don't think they need necessarily. to be
I'm more posing the question versus
Yeah.
offering an opinion.
I don't think it sounds like it's necessary. I mean, if we've already adopted a prime wetlands ordinance,
Well, there is no prime wetlands ordinance. We have a wetlands ordinance, which has this buffer.
Oh,
okay?
And the row that says prime wetlands has these buffer limits.
So we could actually, weirdly adopt this particular warrant and then not,
Prime wetlands could fail, and so we've updated
but
the
you
ordinance.
could have the map that fails, the designation of the actual wetlands. And you could have us still stipulating that if in the event we did have prime wetlands, it would have 50 feet, 100 feet setbacks.
Yeah, it creates a.
I mean, it's,
So we took, just so I'm clear, and I apologize, missed the last meeting. And if I'm asking something out of line that I should have known if I was there, let me know. But, so this, just for clarification, is simply on our existing wetlands ordinance. Has nothing to do with the prime wetlands. And within the current wetlands ordinance, we're actually helping landowners who abut wetlands by reducing the amount of setback, which would be lower than it has been. Is that correct? Is that what we're doing here?
The buffers have been reduced, yes.
But without defining the specific prime wetlands, the prime wetlands piece in the ordinance is irrelevant.
So
That's true.
The map is going on a general warrant article that will be open at deliberative. Is that correct? Am I understanding this correctly?
I haven't seen it on our list of warrants. Unless it gets added on the 30th on us, I have not seen it.
So where is it?
I believe it's scheduled for the 15th.
I think
mean, it was
I think
submitted-
it's scheduled for the 15th here.
Yeah.
Here, yeah.
So we'll be reading the wetland.
And I think that had to do with noticing requirements, correct? I mean, if we wanted to have a public hearing on it, the 15th was the date, that worked on the calendar, why it's on the 15th. So I mean, if you're saying logically, why is the map on the 15th? and we're looking at this here, I think it's a question of just how things were being noticed, right? We had a public hearing for prime wetlands. We had a formulation of it into warrant article form, and that was pushed forward that, please notice this. And the 15th is the date that works for it. So, it isn't, I don't think it's a logical discontinuity. Why we're not talking about the two
I'm
tonight.
just saying should we look at it, I mean, I don't, and I'm still, I admit to be a bit puzzled by just what exactly the planning board's going to be voting. Because we don't vote on general warrant articles.
I think this one is specific. Did you said that legal counsel? I mean, so this
Last
isn't.
year, we put it to the planning board, and we decided there wasn't enough time, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't put it on the ballot. The planning board didn't put it on the ballot
Can
last
we-
year.
Can we get a copy of that? Or
Of
see
the legal
that?
determination?
Yeah,
I don't see why not.
I'm not here to test counsel, but I just want to know for my own.
All right, well, two separate questions. All right, if the question is that the general warrant for the certain designation of certain wetlands as being prime wetlands, that's on the 15th, we want to see if there's any background legal that we want to look at. I think the answer is that we should be able to see that, right?
Yeah, you'd have to do probably, ask someone whatever you gotta do.
So legal.
Or why don't we just ask planning board counsel?
Well, I'd like to,
That's
I
an
would like,
easier-
I'd like to
Well-
see what it was that was, I don't want to have to, please give us a different legal reasoning.
Well, not, we're
Give us
not-
the legal
we're just
reasoning you
looking
used.
for guidance. I'm not
Yeah.
looking for justification.
Right, we can do that, but does that impact what we're discussing here buffer-wise? I don't,
I mean, this is what the prime wetland setbacks we're talking about, right?
I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
would
You
you
can
do?
move this to the 15th if you want.
Does it make sense? I mean, I don't want to, we've noticed this stuff. We have people here that want to discuss it. We could open it up for discussion and say we continue it to the 15th where we have both of them, right?
Yeah, I think no one wanted to say something.
It says it's reduced. Is it reduced? I mean, they were never physically put in place, right? Or were they actually were the buffers already in place, but we didn't define wetlands? Or, so they've actually, if that's not the case and they were never there, they were never really reduced because they're never put in place.
Well, they were there. They're in the ordinance. It's just
The
the map
reduction.
was never defined.
That was-
So the setbacks are already in the ordinance.
They're-
but
they're already-
the map was never defined.
That-
but the
There are,
definition
There.
is.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So for purpose of public comment, you have anything you want to add to this discussion?
Oh, absolutely. I'm Ryan LeBrec, 174 Main Street. This whole process has been bastardized. It's been 3+ years now, and everyone is still confused about the correct process that this is going to
I
be.
want you to speak
moved
to-
forward.
I want you to speak to.
I
what
am
we're
speaking
talking
toward
about,
this.
not-
I am speaking toward this.
Well, I-
And I'm responding to the comments that the discussion that just had, which is in relation to this. From what I understood, so first of all, it seems like backdoored prime wetlands was added to the ordinance with no teeth. It was backdoored in, and now we're saying we're reducing it. There's currently 0 setback to prime wetlands because there are no prime wetlands. So the way this is written is purposely misleading. Maybe it's not purposely misleading, but it's very misleading in that the current wetland setback with no prime wetlands is how many feet? I think it's 50. I don't know what.
75.
75 feet. So this is not a reduction. This is an addition. It's a reduction of the original proposed setback by the Conservation Committee, which they don't even have authority to do this.
Clarify. It came to us with an original setback request. I think we debated it, and we felt that that it should be reduced, all right? And we took a vote and we said that it should be reduced. So,
I understand that, but
So-
the way this is written, if you're a voter, you're looking at it, you're saying, oh, they're reducing the setbacks to wetlands. That's not true. We're increasing the setbacks to wetlands.
prime wetland buffers.
People don't know what the heck prime wetlands means. And it means nothing currently because there's no map and but whatever. We have wetlands. The now soon to be bastardized definition of the wetlands is we're going to have this map and these particular wetlands are going to be prime. And in doing so, we're increasing the setbacks to 100 feet. Forget about 125. Yes, the planning board reduced from 125 to 100, but what the town is seeing is an increase from 75 to 100. So it should indicate that we're increasing the setback for those wetlands that are designated as prime from 75 feet to 100 feet. There should be no discussion of a reduction because there is no reduction.
All right, so
That's
is your-
just
so
gobbledygook.
is your comment, I mean, if I understand your comment, you're specifically talking about the voter guide language that we were wrestling with a little bit earlier. All right, was the idea that, you're making it sound like we've reduced but in actuality, because it's a prime wetland, it's an actual increase if you happen to, from a generic, non-prime wetland type
Correct.
buffer. All right, so is it a question that, so I guess,
I'll update that section on the voters.
all right, I mean, so you understand, I understand his point.
Let me tell you, I've done double, triple somersaults over between these buffers.
We'll do some more,
because
do some
for
more
exactly
flips
the
there,
point
Tim.
Brian's making. They're really not there yet, so we're increasing, but we're decreasing it from what we proposed last year. So, yeah, that is confusing.
All right, so, fair enough.
The somersault we should do is just throw it in the trash
I'm gonna go to Mr.
and stick with the
Alberti.
protection that already
Go to
exists.
Mr. Alberti, and he's gonna make a comment, and then, we can swing
Yeah, no,
back
I'll
to
make
some.
it quick because I think you kind of answered this. And
Yeah.
obviously, an amendment has to be to something that exists. So if it
Right.
doesn't exist, it's not an amendment. So this seems a little wonky
Right,
to his point. And actually, amendment can only happen to something that exists. And if the stated wetland buffers are 75 and this says 100, the way this reads is,
When we adopted the current wetlands ordinance,
yep,
there was a placeholder in this table for prime wetlands, even though we had not officially designated any wetlands as prime wetlands. So in that table, there is those larger amounts, larger buffers that we put forth last year.
got it.
So this is a reduction from what we proposed last year.
Okay. So I think that might be some important clarification that previously designated setbacks to yet to be defined prime wetlands were at 125, and then the new buffer is amended to.
I mean, I'm gonna be sympathetic to the idea. It has been a long route that this is seen. All right, and I don't think it was, I don't think anything nefarious was happening, but it's just, it's kind of a victim of process. So at that point, do you have anything additional?
Yeah,
before I
so
open it up?
how did the whatever the current prime wetlands buffers for the prime wetlands that don't exist end up in the ordinance in the first place? And was that legal? We basically slid in, from what I understand, it probably went to vote and it got voted in. No one even knew what prime wetlands were. There was no definition of prime wetlands. There was no map for prime wetlands. So we slid in these buffers that didn't exist in the town. And now we're trying to slide in a map to apply to the buffers. The whole process is deceiving. The whole process, whether it was purposeful or not, it was deceiving. And now we're trying to say, and now we're trying to say, okay, well, I mean, really, the voter's guide should say, y'all voted on on implementing prime wetlands buffers of X on this date when there were no prime wetlands identified in the town. You agreed to it, and now we're going to The whole thing is screwed up.
We could take another look.
And beyond that, I ask that these,
We could take another look at the voter's guide language and, to provide a little more context so that, if it appears a little opaque, all right? And I think that's a fair criticism.
and the other question, and it mirrors what was said before, they're not separate issues. Establishing the map goes hand in hand with the setbacks. But as I argued previously, because I was told, and I don't know anything about regulations or whatever, but I was told that by establishing the prime wetlands map, if there's an impact to those wetlands, there's greater regulatory actions, legal actions the town can take for those that impact the actual wetlands. So why not adopt the map with the setbacks, the same as the current wetlands? So you're getting the additional legal protections by adopting them as prime wetlands, but you're keeping the setbacks the same so that those of us that are impacted greatly, and we've just heard there'll be no, essentially, which is not surprising to me, from an assessment perspective, they're just going to say, yeah, too bad, so sad, take it in the shorts for the good of the town.
In fairness to what was said earlier by Mr. Coyle, what he said was that the impact of extending the buffers more than what the original wetlands buffers were is not going to result generically in a great amount of abatement, total dollars. All right. So in other words, but again.
In other words, anyone that abuts prime wetlands and has to go through additional legal, environmental scientists, I understand we can come for potentially a conditional use permit if that passes, whatever the case may be, but we're having to jump through hoops and hurdles in order to build something. The same something that would be built to prevent utilizing temporary structures that we're also told we can't use in another ordinance. So for those that want to live in a homeowners association, by all means, go buy a house in a homeowners association and argue amongst yourself. Keep your property exactly the way you all want. But the whole town is not a homeowners association, and this is adding to all these additional things are adding to my ability to utilize my property. And prime wetlands is now going to prevent or create, in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, those additional setbacks, in some cases, prevent people from doing anything on their property without coming before you all or ZBA or whatever and praying that it's allowed. And we didn't buy into that. So fine, if you want to establish prime wetlands as a map and say these are our important wetlands, and that gives us additional regulatory issues in order to, if someone does something to those wetlands, is caught dumping oil and whatever the case may be, then fine. But the setback should be set to the same setback as a regular wetland so that.
To that point, since I'm recalling what what was his name? The wetland.
Mark West.
Mark West. What Mr. West said. The benefit or the protections that are associated with wetlands, and I'm just sort of paraphrasing what he said, is the protection is actually derived from the setbacks. All right. So if you're going to have something where you designate wetlands as prime wetlands, the protection that you're affording these particular wetlands is realized predominantly in the increased buffers. All right. And if I could just a little latitude just to point out that, the wetlands aren't incidental. They're intrinsic to water recharge that we all drink out of. They have enormous environmental and ecological benefit to the, the surrounding, community and such. So, I mean, whether or not, and there's benefit that's associated from DES where you've designated something as prime wetland. All right. So, I mean, if again, if the position is merely ideological that I should be able to do whatever I want to a wetland and things like that, you're going to run into, ultimately you could build in a wetland. You could get various types of variances, but you're going to have to jump through hoops to do it. You could fill in a wetland if you wanted to. If you worked with DES, but you're going to have to work with them to do that. So the idea that, that something new is being introduced, about wetlands that's sort of already a sort of settled discussion, I think.
We already have setbacks.
Right.
No one's arguing to reduce those setbacks further than what they already are. The state of New Hampshire requires 0-foot setback to a wetland. State of New Hampshire also requires protection of said wetlands. We've gone above and beyond, and we have a 75-foot setback to a wetland in order to protect it. To environmentalists, environmental engineers, et cetera, there's no amount of footage that is, it doesn't end. If it was up to them, they'd clear cut the whole, just knock the whole town down and restore the wetlands, and we'd all leave. On an ideological
I was
perspective.
going to say there might be a
But the
little
damage is already done. And that's my point here. We're splitting hairs at this point. It's like, everything that is existing is grandfathered. You mentioned our groundwater. It's already contaminated all over town, which is the reason why we had to build a public water system, because years and decades and eons ago, and probably not even eons ago, businesses and others have been dumping and doing things they shouldn't have done that has already contaminated everything. And we have very little buildable property left. And so what buildable property is left is already owned mostly by citizens of the town. It's affecting individual small landowners disproportionately to anybody else, because that's the area of construction that's available to build at this point. And I understand that, there's, we don't want big commercial businesses to come in and they already can't impact the wetland without those variances. They have the money to get the said variances and also do the reconstruction required, and they have the backing, so they're just going to railroad this anyway. And in the end, who's going to be affected? You and I. Everybody in this room that abuts a wetland is not going to be able to utilize their property. And to say that for an example, a garage structure that's 75 feet from a wetland, as opposed to 100 feet from a wetland, when it's on a property that's next to an impervious parking lot that has hundreds of cars parked in it, that everything that comes out of those cars is going directly into that wetland.
Right.
I'm the bad guy because I have a building that has inert stuff in it within 25 feet closer to a wetland that's already protected by a 75-foot setback. You're by doing this, you're affecting individual homeowners disproportionately to anybody else. And it's not achieving anything. It's not.
Fair enough. I think your point is made.
And the fact that we can't even, is this, and I don't think the question can be answered. Last year, this was tried to be rushed through by the Conservation Commission, who has no authority to even put forth anything. And that's why it ended up in the hands of the planning board at the 11th hour. But we're still in the 11th hour. Deliberative's February 1st.
Just to correct it. I believe the Conservation Commission advises, all right? And this is what they've done in terms of advising, all right? So they're not doing anything sneaky. That's the mechanism that's in place,
Last year, the Conservation Commission was the one that put out, they were trying to go through the process and get this to a warrant article without the planning board. The only reason why it happened, the only reason why it was pushed off is because several of us raised the question. One, the notice wasn't appropriate. There was a snafu on first meeting was canceled. Had to have it because procedurally, if they didn't have it, blah, 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 wasted all our time. We had a second meeting. Then we pointed out that, hey, the second meeting, well, you have no, Conservation Commission has no authority to change the ordinances of the town. So, but there still doesn't seem to be clarity on, is this going to be a warrant article that the Board of Selectmen vote on and is amendable at deliberative session, or is it going to be a planning board ordinance?
If it comes through the planning board.
Or is it just the planning board that's doing the setbacks and
If it
then
comes-
this
if it
other
comes-
thing is floating in the air?
Answering the question, if it comes through the planning board and we're voting on it, then it's not amenable at deliberative.
Correct. This will be on the planning board. It won't
So
be on the
that's the
selectmen's.
answer to your question right there.
Yeah, you won't
Correct,
see
so
this
I-
at deliberative.
So I ask that the planning board votes this bastardized process down and throw it in the trash and not bring it up again.
Fair enough.
And or at the very least, establish the map as prime wetlands, although I don't even agree with that because I know for sure nothing goes to die in any town. Whoever wants it keeps bringing it back until they beat it over the taxpayers' heads and eventually get it approved. But at the very least, if you want to establish prime wetlands, set the setback at the same setback as a regular wetland
All right.
and don't impact our use of our property.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So bringing this back to this
Mr. Alberti.
specific thing, does the map fundamentally change the way or the process of the vote on this piece? Do they need to be packaged together? Should they be, or should they not be?
I don't think it needs to be, but if for the purpose of logical continuity, we could continue this hearing to the 15th, right? And then when we take up the question of the map, we could settle both issues on the 15th. I mean, if you know, like I said, if that's what people, if the board, if that's the sense of what the board wants to do, I'm fine with it either way. I mean, I don't see it as being, you know, contradictory, that you would just have an ordinance that doesn't, there's no map that's applied to. So, okay.
So either way, I guess, but I know my biggest kind of problem with this is it seems like everyone that this directly impacts, I haven't heard anyone speak in favor of it. Granted, you got to look at, but I'm just saying that that is something that does weigh.
Well, I mean, it's, then let me just put it out there. I'll put out I'll put out the argument for the environmental aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right? Just, I mean, just to put it out there and if
As you
people want to
should.
object, okay? Is that we live in a town, okay? We live in a town where, excuse me, we live in a town where the water's contaminated and not incidentally, and it's not de minimis. I mean, we have a Superfund site right across from the school. I believe the Timberlane Regional School is actually built on a landfill. All right, and if anyone that's been at the Timberlane, had children there, you're familiar with notices that would periodically come saying that a particular nozzle or faucet or something was tested and there's some sort of volatile compound that should not be drinking, and that they've removed it so that nobody will be drinking out of that. You know, that begs the question of who's been showering in the stuff that over there. We have public water in this town that's piped in from Massabesic that we had to have a grant to make happen, specifically for the reason that everyone from the top of 125 down to the border of Haverhill has contaminated water because you had an underground storage tank, not leak, rupture. So that water went down and you had people at the end of the road where they turn on faucets and they have petroleum coming through their faucets. All right. And only recently, you know, they've had to have water stripping to remove those compounds to even just sort of make use of the water that was there. You have PFA compounds, PFAs or so-called forever chemicals that have been found in groundwater approximating various areas in town. You know, where it's coming from is a matter of question. But the bottom line is that, you know, we don't even know what the long-term effects of that is. Kidney cancer, bladder cancer, various other cancers and things like that. All right, so we have a Superfund site that was up the road in Kingston that used to be near the Shell station up there. That was a barrel reclamation where people from Haverhill or Massachusetts would bring their waste chemicals up, and it would be dumped directly into the ground, rinsed, and then resold on the market. That whole area for over 50 years has been an EPA reclamation project, and it's only recently in the last couple of years that they've removed monitoring wells and things like that. All right, and even the bead site that we've had up there, it's being remediated by removing the first 10 feet of the topsoil. That's considered toxic waste. That has to have a whole EPA plan that if it's going to be moved, it has to have removed from the site. It needs to be put in some designated site in perpetuity, wherever that's going to be. They've talked about dredging Kelly Brook. Kelly Brook feeds into an aquifer where hundreds of houses draw their water from, okay? And that's the reason why if you have a community well in Plastow, that's not because of convenience. That's because a lot of times that they can't sink an individual well at a house because of point contamination. So you have a community well where you can pull water that's monitored and it's clean, and then you pipe it to everyone else's house. All right, so, you know, the argument that you should be able to do whatever you want and not have any oversight and just that be the end of it, that argument is kind of since ended, all right, with the fact that we can't drink our water or you drink it at your own risk. We had somebody that talked about having a house that abutted the bead site, all right, talking about petroleum signatures coming up when it rained a lot on his yard, and that his well is monitored X number of times. And if they do find volatiles in that, of that, several hundred volatiles that they're looking for in those wells, if they do find that, then that well becomes a new monitoring well for the bead site for whatever the various plumes of pollution that they have there. So the idea that you do whatever you want has got us to this point where we're surrounded by EPA Superfund sites. You can't drink the water, or you drink it at your own risk. So I think that in a nutshell, that's sort of the historical narrative of the dirty water that Plastow has because of people doing whatever they want. Anyone else want to contribute? Please come up. Yeah, you.
I know it's getting late,
It's not
so
your mockery.
I don't know about any of you, but I have kids come from all over for Christmas, so I just find the last conversation so upsetting. I mean, I take great pride in what I've have and developed over the last 50 years. It's beautiful. And I don't like being told that I have, I mean, I mean, it's so confusing what you just talked about a while ago about, I don't know, I'm more upset leaving here than when I came in. And perhaps the real issue here is what you're talking about, truthfully, and I'm not disparaging it, but it's not new news. It's almost every town. And it's sad and it's disgusting for our future generations. And yes, maybe it could be helped if there was more education on it. I don't know what you teach in your schools, but this is not why I'm here. I'm just saying it's not new news. But I also think that putting this system that I'm hearing about, you know, it's confusing. Like, who started this, where it's going, the warrant, you're talking about something that I've worked on almost my whole life, and it's nice. And I don't know. I don't know. I just wanted to come up and say thank you for being here, because it takes a lot to be here too. and listened to everyone, and I do know that we're probably all on the same page. I don't believe in lots of confusing rules that every time I move, I have to be checked and balanced. And additionally, for me personally, water's being dumped on my property. It just appeared and it's killing my trees. I know you're starting to be sick of hearing me saying it, but you're
Please,
creating
please.
wetlands out of what I have. And that should not be happening. And do I want to hire attorneys and take Plastow to court? Because someone put it there and it wasn't me. And not anybody just works on the roads, digs them up and sticks a connector between Plastow land, which was purchased in perpetuity, and drains it across the street onto my lot. It was never like that when Mr. Cox was there. Only when the land was sold, Plastow bought a lot of the acreage, and it's pretty. It's very pretty. And they had a really fun time digging this hole, emptying the water that was collecting. But we are all in the same boat. So I don't like what I've been through tonight in the last 3 meetings.
I think you had a question about the culvert, okay?
But that's not for here tonight. I'm just saying you're because of that, I'm hearing this wetlands situation, that's getting worse. And that isn't right. And I don't want to turn it into the issue. As for the water, God, you're scaring me about Plastow, and it's not just Plastow.
No, it's not.
It's everywhere. And so everybody better get their act together on educating the kids, really. In Jamestown, I grew up, we were 15 years in Jamestown, Rhode Island. Part of the education system is to train the kids and educate them how the island got there, how the Native Americans were there, how they kept it clean, how we take care of our water. It's amazing. And that's just one little space, right near here. Maybe, anyway.
Fair.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for being
Sir,
here.
did you want to say something? Again, just for the record, state your name, your address, and speak clearly into the mic.
All right. Name is Olaf Westphalen, 221 Oak Ridge Road. Last name, of course. Yeah, I don't have much, I'm not going to add much to the conversation. I'm also with the Conservation Commission. Sorry you missed the meeting, the last meeting. Mr. West gave a nice presentation on the whole thing. I'm for the article or whatever you guys are working on. Not too familiar with the town the procedures and mechanics of getting everything into the warrant, but I do agree with the point that was raised earlier, is that the public, what is it, the public advice, what's the second, that last paragraph?
Oh, for the voter's guide.
Voter's guide or whatever. I think that is a little bit misleading, and I think that we could improve that, Tim, and say that, this is what it was, this is what we had proposed in 2023, and then this is where we are now. I think that would make it clearer. So that's about all I wanted to add. And I do agree with your comment about that the contamination is, and it's not only coming from industrial and commercial sources, it's also coming from people, normal residential use. And then if you have a certain use and then somebody sells the property and then somebody else uses it, who knows what they're going to do. You could be the cleanest, most conscientious person ever, but the next person coming in there. So you got to protect the wetlands. So
Right, fair enough.
that's all I got.
Thank you.
Yeah, to go on his point, right? Because people may read this and go, I heard someone, saying something about the wetlands, and they'll actually probably vote no, not realizing that by voting no, it maintains a larger setback than what this is. So just kind of reiterate how to phrase the voter's guide.
That's actually an excellent point. I mean, so the existing, just to
Kind of like the
highlight.
school budget, right? When you vote agast the
Yeah,
proposed, and then you get the default, and the
So
default's
the-
actually higher because you're like, screw
So
this.
are the buffers right now for prime, it's a placeholder. you're saying. But they're higher right now than it is here, than what's being
Right now,
proposed.
the ones that were put in as a placeholder are higher
All right, so,
than the ones that are.
all right, so that's actually an important point, that other than the fact that if these weren't amended, the way we're talking about, the placeholders numbers are actually higher than what we're actually talking about here. So, I mean, I think that's a good clarifying point. If there's no further, or last call, if you want to come up, because I'm thinking that I'm going to put to the board maybe that we should continue this to the next one. So the next, January 15th, just so that we're talking about the map and the setbacks sort of logically coherent in one night. So, before we do that, what do you have?
Eric Bell, 4 Tracy Lane. That is required every time I come up here, isn't it?
Probably good.
Just a question.
People could be
Short
coming in at
memory
any
span.
time to watch this, and they want to know who
Okay.
you are each time you're up.
Absolutely. If my wife would only watch, I guess I'll find that out. This section is about the buffers. A lot has been said. I agree with a lot of it. In my own way, I would phrase it my way of doing it. A couple points that I'd like to just mention, which are playing off the last meeting. Okay, and I just would like to restate them again. The first one is that one of the gentlemen that came up here in the last meeting says if I remember correctly, he has 60 acres and he's going to be affected to the tune of about 5 acres. Now, that's what he said. I don't know the veracity of that. But he was trying to make the point, the buffers were going to have not a significant impact. Okay? In my own case, my wetlands are not prime. It's my neighbors are prime. The way I figure it is, next year, mine might be prime, or the year after. And so I need to be here in order to talk about that. In the last meeting, one of the people that was present, the lady had shown an envelope, 1,000 letters that were not collected, were not picked up by the owners. And she made a very strong point. They're not showing up. That's true. We all lead busy lives. We all have complex, there's a lot of things going on. Some people don't know why, and I'm sure some people don't care. But some people not here do care. I don't know why they're not here. They don't know. They didn't come to the last one, for whatever the reasons may be. This very small group of people may be representing a larger number than what one might suspect, okay? And I think that does matter, although you've got to weigh other things, that matters as well. It really does, that people are showing up for this, even if it is a very small group. On the wording for the voter's guide, that has been intended to. The only reason why I'm going to mention it is the discussion before left me puzzled. It seems to me the original setbacks versus what's being proposed is the line you want to draw. Maybe that's perfectly clear or not, but I thought I would say it. In my opinion, if we had a 75 and it's now to a 100, that's the issue. If it was 75 and now it's 50, it's less, that's the issue that people want to read. They don't want to know about the fandom placeholders. They want to know what's the change. That's what's material to them. I know, it's obvious. I'm Captain Obvious tonight. I just thought I'd mention him. I agree with the point. First off, Mr. Anthony, you did an excellent recitation of the dangers that we've had, the problems that we had. I wouldn't even try to counter that because I'm not particularly knowledgeable. I am persuaded that we need some protection. May I say, we have wetland protection, and if we're not doing anything about it, more protection is not what we need. Now, I'm not trying to contravene the idea of the prime, but I must say, if we're not protecting our wetlands now, is something going to happen? Because I know one thing for sure, the people who want to try to abide by these restrictions and these laws and the changes of regulations, the ones who will do it. Bully for them. And the ones who don't, won't. Apparently, you folks have the ability to affect adopting the prime wetlands in this case. We've had that discussion, okay? I'm going to ask you now for the third time, if we're not protecting the wetlands properly, what does more going to give us? And I don't want to feel good, I just want to do it. Maybe there's more teeth, or maybe it's just more regulation. So I ask you to consider that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Right. From the board, just quickly, I think unless you have something
Yeah, I need to
absolute-
respond
Okay,
quickly.
you have something absolutely new, I think we're going to move to continue
I do.
this portion of it to tomorrow. So I'll give you a couple minutes, but please limit it to no
That's
more than
fine.
a couple minutes.
With all due respect, Richard, fear mongering doesn't help in this argument. A setback, whether it's 75 feet or 100 feet, wouldn't have prevented probably any of what you're describing. Some of what you're describing was the town government's responsibility. Trash, landfills, PFA, probably there's been talk of fire department activities and things that may have caused that. Of course, there's denial of that as well. Some of the contamination that you're talking about was created by the same government that's trying to regulate the people, thinking that they're preventing contamination. And adding all that stuff, it's all unfortunate. And if we could dial back in time, absolutely. None of us in this room would allow any of that to happen if we could have prevented it, obviously. But that's neither here nor there at this point. That damage is done. The water is contaminated. There's no coming back from it completely. It's not going to happen. And by doing this, you're just impacting individual residents and in a way that maybe makes certain people in town feel better, but isn't actually accomplishing dialing back what everybody wants is dial back time and not have all these issues in town. So
I appreciate.
it's fear mongering. Let's not fear monger. Let's look at who's impacted by this.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so purposes, is there a consensus on the board that we continue this public hearing to the 15th for this particular article? And does that make sense? And then maybe, we'll have some redrawn language. So ZBA 25-08 is continued to 6:30, second floor, 6:30, January 15th, second floor, Plastow Town Hall. This would constitute your notice, and there'll be no further notice to that effect. All right. All right, let's power through 25-10. Proposed Plastow zoning amendment, Z 25-10. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number 10 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance, Article 9, signs 220-62, temporary signs to read as follows. 220-62, temporary signs. 1, permit duration, size, and fee. 2, temporary signs shall pertain to the permitted use conducted on the premises upon which they are located. Temporary signs shall be no larger than 32 feet.
Square feet.
Square feet, thank you. Amended 3-11-2008, ATM by Article 42, 3-1318, ATM by Article Z-18-14, all right. J, grand opening sign package permit, all right? So, Plastow zoning amendment Z25-4 voters guide. This language conforms the current sign ordinance with federal law prohibiting the regulation of sign contact. It also removes certain language regarding fees which are otherwise contained within the town's fee schedule. All right, any comment by anyone on the board or discussion? Nope. I think it's pretty straightforward. Is there anyone from the public that wants to speak directly to this article briefly, please? Or succinctly. You don't have to be brief, you just need to be succinct.
Ryan Lebrecht, 174 Main Street. Has the zoning board considered in their language adding language to anything signage related that indicates that the Board of Selectmen can't just nilly-willy waive signage requirements when it comes to the town. I.e. lighted signboards placed on Main Street that aren't allowed for anybody else, but we can just,
To that point.
Wave it
no,
away.
wait. To that point, if you have lighted signs like you see in front of the town, in front of the school, that's because it's the town, correct? And then the school is not subject to our, correct me if I'm wrong,
That's correct, the school,
is exempt in that fashion.
nor is the town,
So,
which is,
so
the
the
town's
answer
not-
to your question is no, we can't, we can't.
so the town doesn't have to
bind the town
abide
with
by
the
their
school.
own rules?
We don't have the board
Does not
Have
have the authority.
the authority to do so.
So,
So if the town has a prime wetland, they can build on the wetland if they want to. They don't have to follow their own rules.
I don't believe that's a fair.
Or within the
analogy.
setback, and they don't
No,
have
I
to come
mean,
to you
it's
guys.
just- If you're prime wetlands, it's a DES
Well-
requirement, so it's,
yeah, I
But
mean,
not the setback.
the town would have to follow state rules.
Right, so the town could build within, the state rules 0 feet, so the town could build at 1 foot. And I can build at, I have to build at 100 feet.
So my point is, if you have comment on this particular one, I can't talk
understand.
to the, the ideological
understand.
position of the town being exempt from its own zoning regulations.
Government
Mr.
likes
Coyle
to,
can take that up during public comment, the BOS.
And it's cool. My family couldn't
Sorry.
afford the Elway, which we didn't have enough money.
Did he do it more than once?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just, you read this and then turn around and have someone sharp shoot about what you're saying and all that stuff. Give me a break, Mr. Dash 7 or .7 over there.
Okay, Mr. Richardson.
Yeah. All right, any other comments or?
Let's just vote on this one,
Okay.
please.
All right.
Don't move any
No more
forward.
comment. I move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z25-10 to the warrant as being recommended by the Plastow Planning Board. Article 9, signs amended 220-62 temporary signs. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, excellent. Okay.
Is this the definitions one?
Okay, I think I'm going to go out of order a little bit and just hit the citizens petitions before we swing around to the other ones. Just to, because it's a sort of a ministerial where we're voting just to post it to public comment. Discussion on it will be limited specifically to the question of posting it. Okay, so arguably, if we had like a number of days that we could choose from, then that would the discussion would be. We're not discussing the content of it, and the content of it would be discussed at the public hearing with respect to the citizens petition. All right, so,
On this one, I'm going to recuse myself.
yes, please. Did Tim just,
You closing the
You
public
might
hearing?
have,
yes, how about that, right? Why not? So in terms of zoning amendment public hearings, I'll close the public hearing at 9:05. All right.
Does that mean
You can stay if you
No.
want. It's just a question of everything that we talked about in terms of these
Public
public
hearing is
hearings
over.
for those amendments that we just powered through for the last 2 hours is closed.
more than welcome to stay.
The next two are two additional, but they're citizens petitions, and the board doesn't have the authority to do anything with them except for vote whether or not we'd recommend them. But they're going to go on ballot.
All right. Specifically, my understanding is that we're voting to schedule it. We're not
Right.
tonight. Our vote isn't whether or not we recommend it or not.
I'll get
The
you.
recommendation will be on the 15th.
Right.
All right, so,
On the 15th.
all right, so I guess, all right, so for purposes of this, I'm going to appoint Tom Alberti as a voting member. And again, it's for purposes of scheduling the public hearing
Yeah.
that we have to do. So it's ministerial in the sense of us picking a day. So,
And I know these are still being looked at too by legal.
So we don't have to read them. We just vote it.
Yeah, to really post it, because I know I know we haven't got into it if you want to do each one at a time, but I know the second one, that could end up with the selectmen.
Well, okay, so I wanted to, all right, so I move to post CP 25-1 and CP 25-2 for public hearings on January 15th, 2025. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, opposed, abstained. All right, so purposes of the citizens petitions filed by Daniel Kane, CP 25-1 and CP 25-2, the public hearing will be January 15th, 2025.
Charlie, you'll note that Tim was not present for the vote, and that I voted on this one, correct?
Tom was appointed in Tim's absence. All right, so, all right.
Question?
A generic question.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Yes, well, if you want, I mean,
We want to make sure you get your steps in.
they just won't hear you if, you know.
Eric Bell, 4 Tracy Lane. Are these petitions now available on the website? I don't see them, but that's just,
Should be.
they should be.
Citizens, I don't know if they are or
I
not.
think they are. I think they are.
I'm not positive. I haven't checked, so I don't know.
No, I haven't checked
It's a
either.
good question, huh?
Are they,
Ryan
Yeah.
says he's looking at it.
Oh, on the agenda, right?
I
Part of
looked at
that.
Should be on the agenda.
That's it. Fine, thank you. I'll take another look.
Yeah.
very good. All right. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have a bond hearing, so I think we can, I don't think there's, we're going to post, these are for posting the proposed zoning amendments for public hearing on the 15th, so.
This one, yeah, this one.
No, this packet here.
Yeah, that's not.
Yes.
Oh, she has my copy.
Okay. All right, so we'll just go through.
Yeah.
Do I need to read these? I mean, in terms of like in whole or not, part?
No, you don't.
All right, so,
We're just really kind of what it's.
all right. Dan, if we could just guide us through it. Let me see that. I'm going to go Z 25-2, the proposed Plastow zoning amendment, Z 25-2. Are you in favor of the adoption of the amendment number 2 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance, Article 2, 220-2, definitions to add definitions of terms included in the recent enactment of statutes by New Hampshire legislatures, clarify the definition of residential, commercial, industrial uses in the districts to read as follows. All right, so,
All right, well, the copy you have in front of you should have some yellow highlights, which are the final nits after the committee went through them, just to make sure we had capitalized all the defined terms. Anywhere we saw an RSA reference, we included the phrase as amended from time to time. And there were some minor, even after looking at this a million times, there were some minor nits. Also, family group daycare home was mislabeled in the definition that had been reviewed by council as family daycare group home. So we corrected that.
all right, any,
Yeah, there was nothing substantive other than to conform with the revised proposed Z25-6. We removed the notion of home industry and replaced it with home daycare. And then we added a definition of the zoning map. Just because it was kind of, it was referenced, but not quite defined, so we just moved it to the definitions.
Do I have a
But
motion?
these have all been reviewed by council
Yep.
a couple of times.
All right, so I move to propose zoning amendment Z 2502, Article 2. Lost my place, for public hearing on January 15th, 2025. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right. So 2505.
And 5 and 6 are kind of tied together, right?
Yeah, and what we
Yeah, they
did
really
is, we just flipped 6 to 5, 5 to 6, because it made sense to talk about the text.
5 is coming after 6 in this package.
Yes, yes.
Yes, right. So if
the
you
same
want us to
thing.
go to.
Not to
6 or
confuse
5
you,
now.
but that's why
We're
we
going to
did
go
it.
to 5 now. Okay, let's go by 6 first.
So again, the same convention.
There. Yep, home operation. Right?
So basically what we did from this is we took all the comments that we got and we went back and took a look at the previous draft and then are proposing this. So one of the comments from council that we got back was try to do a better job at defining what's a profession, what's an occupation, what's a trade. So we tried to do that. The other substantive one was home daycare. One of the recommendations was to treat this as a separate ordinance. We had a fair amount of discussion amongst the committee, and our view was it relates to home activity. It should be in the home activity ordinance. And what we did is we eliminated the previous definition and use of a home industry and moved daycare in. So daycare actually sits in the ordinance as a separate use. Again, subject to conditional use, but we believe it meets the criteria of House Bill 1567. And it's in here isolated and identified.
All right. So just to kind of, just bounce around, what we're looking at here, we have a memo with respect to an amendment, Z 2511, that references House Bill 1567. Does the amendment, either 5 or 6, contemplate or what's being talked about in this particular one?
It addresses everything in House Bill 1567. We believe it
Okay.
does.
I think, in my opinion, that the problem you have is if 5 and 6 get defeated, that means HB 1567 would also get defeated. That's why I think it should stand alone, just so everyone understands that. Because the HB 1567, the memo, it's just so we stay in compliance with the state RSAs. That's why I think that should stand alone.
I think that's actually an excellent point. Logically, does that make sense? I mean, is there any harm in having 5 and 6 and then are they mutually exclusive or contradictory in any way?
To what?
Well, you 5 and 6 and then the proposed one for Z 2511.
No, they do the same thing.
So if like 5, for whatever reason, if 5 or 6 were to be knocked out, but this one were to be prevailed, we're still in compliance of House Bill 1567.
Well, you'd have to conform that though to the definitions that we changed because they're not in that draft. It doesn't do that.
Yeah, because
And you'd also have to play around with probably 4 again too in the tables.
I know myself, I am not in favor of 5 and 6.
Right.
Because I think it turns residential into commercial, and that's where I have an issue. I don't think anybody in a residential area wants to see their area turn commercial. And I think that's it. I mean, all of a sudden you could have a residential home, somebody starts running a business out of their home, now all of a sudden your car's parked in the street during the day, it can change the fabric of that neighborhood. That's my opinion.
No, and I think, it's certainly a fair view. My belief is it's already done, I mean, it's just allowed by special exception. You know, all this ordinance does is actually release the restrictions, you know, by defining what a home office is. You know, right now you have to go, if you want to run an office out of your home, you have to go get a permit.
Right.
This allows you to do it by right without a permit. You know, a home occupancy, you can run a business, you've got no employees, no visible use, you know, as the definitions drive these uses here, you know? And there's some detail and some heft to this. And a home business, again, fairly limited. You can have an employee, but that's kind of been opened up with this home daycare. You know, which is going to be the largest use in terms of people, traffic, everything of any one of these,
Well,
you know.
it also
proposed
depends what
uses.
business you start running out of your home too.
Yeah.
You don't know how much more traffic it's gonna create on the street.
Right now, go look at any residential unit in, you know, neighborhood in traffic. Amazon, FedEx, UPS are there, you know, a
Yeah, but-
billion times a day.
Yeah, but then you add on to more to that. Say someone's doing an embroidery shop or something like that, and all of a sudden you get people coming in and out.
But
Or
there,
a beauty salon or something like that. I just think there's a reason commercial's commercial and residential's residential.
So what's the town doing for North Ave? Traffic wise?
That's, I mean, you can't stop, granted, you can't stop traffic coming up and down your street. But if a residential should be residential, not commercial, running a business, that's something totally different.
Yeah, so North Ave is residential, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are people running
we have-
businesses out of their home, adding additional traffic to it?
but the limit's 5 visits a day.
That's tough to monitor. I mean, I am not in favor of 5 and 6, because I think it makes residential, opens it up to commercial.
Tim, you have any angst or about at least moving it towards public comment?
Well, I don't care if we move it for a public hearing, but I do agree with Bill for the most part. It was
Is this how someone comes up with an adult diaper, you know, baby something business?
That's not a profession, occupation, or
Tim
trade.
was still talking to
What
him.
was there? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought he said.
No,
I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's pieces that are, you know, probably fit in with our current mode of operation.
people that are doing
We have mixed use, but, yeah, so, yeah, I'd be in favor of posting it for the public hearing, but
Is some of our home-based occupancy definitions and ordinances currently, or would you consider it sort of piecemeal, or is it pretty defined? And I think, does this zoning work broaden the ability to do business out of home, or does it define
Define it
better
better.
and limit it? Sounds like your concern is it broadens.
I think it broadens it.
yeah.
Anyone else? Lori? You?
No.
Okay. So I move to proposed zoning amendment Z 25-05 and -06 for public hearing on January 15th. Do I have a second?
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, so 401. All right. And number 9. All right, let's, jeez. All right. 9, the proposed Plastow zoning amendment Z 25-9. Are you in favor of the adoption of the amendment number 9 as proposed, but
Gonna do 6?
we did 5 and 6 together.
You're looking at them, okay.
We said 5 and
All right.
6, or. All right. Plastow zoning amendment 25-9. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number 9 as proposed by the Plastow Planning Board to the Plastow zoning ordinance article, is that 20, heck, 11? I don't think that's right, but Article,
29, isn't it?
I don't know, X1. I don't know.
Maybe there's a,
Yeah. All right. Fines, penalties to replace Article 11 in its entirety with the
There we
following.
go,
should be Article 21.
Okay.
21. That's it.
All right. Brief. What was done, was this a product of comments or something from
Yes, so
legal?
we basically took this whole thing, I'd gone back, and Laurie and Karen went back, we looked at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, and we tried to determine, if we could come up with something that, made some sense, lessen the touch, because there's nothing in that, there's nothing in the ordinance now that relates to administration and enforcement, other than 2 paragraphs, one of which relates only to fines, and one is just a fairly broad, and it doesn't tie to anything, doesn't even refer to an RSA.
Yep.
See, the intent here was to really describe
The fine.
zoning enforcement and to specifically create an administrative piece that would be used first. The challenge with this is as the planning board, our responsibility is to propose zoning ordinances, but we don't enforce anything. We're not in that lane. And this is just trying to fill a hole in the donut. And I think actually it does a pretty good job at doing that. It's a question of,
Citizens haven't really understand it.
well, you have to,
They don't know where the
again, this
authority
gets back to clarity and lack of ambiguity.
Right,
Is-
clarity again.
If you create a process where you read it and you understand it, then, it actually promotes enforcement rather than
Right.
where people fall into the trap in this town and others, is that if they think it doesn't say anything, it's carte blanche, that they can do whatever they want.
But isn't there an RSA that this points to?
This is actually, there's actually 4 RSAs that this all
They
relates
just
to.
aren't thorough.
This is the one that the Board of Selectmen weighed in on, right?
Yes.
So it is
And-
appropriate for us to, even though we don't enforce, we define how the town enforces
Well, the ordinance does.
ordinances.
The ordinance.
Yes,
All the
yeah,
ordinance.
exactly. We're helping to
Yeah.
craft the ordinance.
'Cause I thought there was an RSA that weighed in on this, and our stance was we wanted to stay with the RSA because the RSA language could change at any time, and then you'd have the contradiction between the RSA and what's written here.
Yeah, we tried to, as again, that amended from time to time, we try to play with that, but there's actually 4 RSAs that relate to enforcement.
Yeah.
One relates to, essentially general enforcement through into Superior Court. There's another RSA that relates to enforcement through cease and desist orders, which is District Court, which is a far less costly option. It's a more straightforward
Superior.
option. There's an RSA that relates to fines. And there's an RSA actually that relates to general governments that allows for some administrative enforcement.
Yeah, I know our stance was stay with the RSAs, because the RSA changes, and then all of a sudden, you got 10 months, before, say, we have another, election, where we can make those changes. That's why we felt that way. And the other thing too, I know the zoning officer and code enforcement, did they weigh in at all? Any opinions from them?
Well, we don't have one of them anyway.
Well, I don't think we did get any input. It was only
No,
from the Board of Selectmen.
they've
Right.
certainly had this.
Yeah.
but we haven't received any.
So, I mean, if an RSA is amended from time to time anyways, I mean, doesn't the RSA, if there is ambiguity or whatever, or if there's a misalignment, the RSA prevails anyways, doesn't it? I mean, you don't
Well-
have two competing,
Well, in towns are permitted under the statute to be more restrictive than the RSAs. They can't be less restrictive.
all right, so if the RSA became more restrictive than what we had, then, they couldn't be.
Well, again, there's the only RSA we refer to is fines.
Okay.
It refers, there's no enforcement, provision within our zoning ordinance.
All right, well,
I think that the townspeople have concerns about enforcement, so I feel like helping to define enforcement will hopefully help with the process.
Right,
that's an excellent point.
exactly. That's why we did it.
All right, anything else from anybody? Is there a motion to put it to public hearing, or not? I say I move to post the proposed zoning amendment Z2509 for public hearing on January 15th, 2025, Article 21. All right, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
No,
Opposed?
no,
Right, 4-1, 401,
410.
410. 141, whatever. All right.
And I still think we should do something about HP 1567. I still think that should stand on its own.
So do we want to just
Post it for public.
agree to post it to public meeting, Bill?
Yeah, because I think we should,
I think that's,
just, because then, that way there you cover yourself.
that's fine. I think
5 and 6, both?
No, not 5 and 6,
no.
the
11.
HB 1567,
You're talking about 5 and 6.
yeah, would be number 11.
Yeah.
Right.
That way there you cover yourself. If the other two get defeated, you have this one.
Fair enough. You want to make the motion, or?
That makes sense.
Yeah, I move to post proposed zoning amendment Z2511 for public hearing on January 15th, 2025.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? All right. 500. All right. Okay. Memorandum. The Planning Department has received a written request from Barbara Murphy Fielding for the release of escrow being held for the two-lot subdivision project at 11 Springville View Terrace. The planning board conditionally approved the application for a two-lot subdivision on October 2nd, 2024. Conditions were met and the plan was recorded at Rockingham County Registry of Deeds on November 21, 2024. There are no outstanding invoices for this application. There will not be any need for field inspections as this application was for the subdivision of a residential lot. The Department of Building Safety will oversee the construction of the new single-family dwelling. After payments of the invoices, there is a balance of $1,695 in the escrow account. This is not an interest-bearing account. There was no bond required for this application. So I move that the balance of $1,695 being held in escrow account for the two-lot subdivision application of 11 Springfield Terrace be released to the property owner, Barbara Murphy Fielding, and the escrow account closed. Do I have a second?
No second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? All right,
Abstain.
5, okay. So 410, right?
401.
4-0.
401.
401, just abstain that at the end.
It's been a long night.
Yeah, it is. It's like 401.
We got you, though. We're
Thanks.
for you.
It's, all right. All right, any old business,
Other than I'm getting old.
new business? Is this, okay, what's this last one here?
It's a rehearing.
It's a rehearing.
Is this for,
It's a rehearing for the ZBA.
all right, well, I guess, should we read it then?
Yeah, you might as well.
All right.
You're there now.
Okay, the Plastow Zoning Board of Adjustment will be holding a meeting Thursday, January 2nd, 2025 at 6:30 PM, 145 Main Street, second floor, Plastow, New Hampshire, 03865, to consider the following request for relief. Motion for rehearing. This is a deliberative process only, no public testimony. Public hearings were 2408, a request from Strategic Real Estate Management for a variance from Article 5, Table 220-32B.B to allow a parcel to be used as a private parking facility to store up to 61 axle trailers in the same area formerly occupied by a former state park and ride. The property is located at 45 Westville Road, tax map 26, lot 36 in the C1 zoning district. The property owner of record is 45 Westville Road Realty LLC. All requests are to the Plastow zoning ordinances. All right, materials are available for viewing in the Plastow, in the planning/ZBA office during regular hours. Thank you.
When is this for now? What date? No, it's not on the.
January 2nd.
January 2nd.
You'll still be hungover.
Oh, gee.
Bet your life, I'll make sure.
All right. Again, any last business?
Did you have citizens petitions?
That's
did-
just, it
we
looks like that's a
scheduled it.
motion for rehearing, so they don't even,
Okay.
like,
So that's
allow
scheduled.
people to really speak. They
I figured since it was ministerial and it was
Decide
just a
whether-
matter of scheduling it, then we weren't going to have a special hearing, so,
No problem.
okay, good. All right, then if that's the case, at 9:33, I close the meeting. Thank you.